Welcome to another episode of Inflection. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. And we were going to actually do this on Friday, but because of everything that's going on right now, we decided to go a little bit early to do it kind of like a live episode of, well, it's always live, but this is live coverage of an actual event unfolding right now. Now, Angelo, you just got up where you are in Europe. What was the first thing you saw when you got up this morning?
Well, Brian, sadly, some bombing. It seems like we are finally into action. There's been, the fake news about Russia invading, being active in Donbass and so on. It's been 8 years that they're saying there are troops in Donbass, and this time there are troops in Donbass. Putin is actually putting in action, what he said. He's been telling people in Ukraine, you have to respect Minsk agreement all along. It was very clear. You shouldn't enter into NATO. You should stop shelling. You should respect your word. You said you were going to give some autonomy to the Donbass region. You're not. You should protect the minorities, the ethnic Russian ethnic minorities. You didn't. You even put a law into your constitution that suppresses the Russian language. So up to a certain point, and Putin is putting into action what he said, and we have to see now these days to which extent. He said, I just saw a Twitter. He said he's aiming at the demilitarization of Ukraine and denazification. Put yourself in the position of Putin. Putin, and Russian history. Russian had 27 million people that died because of Nazis. You got next door a puppet regime, U.S. puppet regime, which is backed by radical forces, neo-Nazis. And Azov battalion, right sectors. Those are Nazis battalions. They have Nazi insignia, and so can you imagine Russia having this next door and having the ethnic population which is being discriminated? There's a cultural genocide happening next door in Ukraine, and Russians, Putin wants to avoid that. He wants to protect its people that are in Ukraine, and that's the problem that goes back to the USSR, the carving of those ex-USSR nations,
Absolutely, and as you were talking and setting this up, let's see, you got to share the screen. This is NATO expansion, and look at this, all along Russia's border. And now you have to remember, now there's Ukraine here in the mix. This is NATO after the fall of the Soviet Union. NATO was supposed to stop the spread of communism across Europe, and the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. So why is NATO still around, and why is it still expanding towards Russia's border? Because it was always a hegemonic project. It was always meant to spread to Russia's border and then incorporate Russia itself. This is the U.S. as expanding, doubling down on its unipolar international order they call rules-based order. This is what the U.S. has been doing for decades and decades. What Russia is doing right now in Ukraine is responding to decades of provocation, decades of encirclement and encroachment, decades of behavior that if it was the other way around and it was Russian troops sitting on the border with the United States and Canada or Mexico, the U.S. would have long ago declared war and had it out with these foreign forces crossing oceans to place themselves along America's border. This is what's happening in Ukraine right now. And you just laid it out perfectly. There are literal battalions of Nazis in Ukraine's military. These aren't street gangs. Every country has extremists, gangs out on the street, criminal gangs that probably are breaking laws or are at odds with society. These are battalions that are funded and armed by the central government in Ukraine. These are not gangs. And so all of this adding up, this is a real threat that is on Russia's border. And we're going to go through all of this. We're going to keep checking the headlines. Angelo, if anything pops up, please let me know in the comment section. If any breaking news just tell us what the source is. We'll try to find it and put it up and see as we're gonna do this live coverage sort of thing here. We've got we're gonna have different things going live. This is RT. My reasoning here is if RT says it and the Western media says it, if it both lines up, it's probably going to be true. Otherwise, if it's just Russia saying it, or if it's just the Western media saying it, there's really no way to tell if it's true or not. So we got to be very careful. We cannot jump to conclusions. We cannot look at a headline that fits into something that we want to happen and just say it happened because I want it to. We have to really be careful what we go with as fact and what we go off as just maybe, probably, maybe not, maybe not. Let's see, where do we want to start with the background here? Where's a good, here is a good article to start with. This is from The Guardian. If you look at the date carefully, it's 2004. The push that took over the government, the elected government of Ukraine in 2014, that was not the first time the U.S. tried this. This is from The Guardian, 2004. The U.S. had already been at this for years and years since the collapse of the Soviet Union, trying to overthrow every single government, every single country along Russia's borders. They have been trying to overthrow them and put into power a client regime. And it says right here, this is very explicit, unambiguous. But while the gains of the orange-bedecked chestnut revolution are Ukraine's, the campaign is an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing that, and pay attention to this part, in 4 countries in 4 years has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and topple unsavory regimes. But if you take out these adjectives and you just think about what they're saying the U.S. was interfering in elections and overthrowing governments they didn't like and replacing them with ones that they did like. This was 2004. And they say 4 other countries. They're talking about Belarus, they're talking about Georgia, they're talking about Ukraine, and what was the other? Serbia. They were talking about these countries that they were doing. All of this was being done in all of these countries. This is what was going on along Russia's borders as far back as 2004. And this is the Western media admitting this. Angelo, do you have any recollection of what was going on in 2004?
Yes, well, 2004, it's the first color revolution. It was the orange revolution back then. So there was an attempt to put a US puppet there. What they did, they actually managed all along since 2004 to have anti-Russian president. But even Yanukovych in 2014, he was not pro-Russian. He was no, but he was not anti-Russian enough for the West. And this is why they did a coup. So everything that you see right now that is happening in Ukraine, if you don't have the background, the important background that 2014, there was a coup. Once there was a coup, behind this, neo-Nazis, they rewrote actually all the rulers of the game. So basically, it's no more democracy since 2014. No matter if you have elections, but if you rewrite the rules of the game and actually you imprison opponents, that you shut down pro-Russian media, you start shutting down the voices of Russians, then it's no more democracy. I just want to add something, it's good that we get I got some news coming in. Kharkov just fell, it's in the hands of the Russian army. And this comes from the news, ASB News military. It's quite credible information. So it seems that Kharkov just fell. So as we speaking, there's lots of things happening. So I will try to throw in breaking news there.
That was one of the cities that's kind of in eastern Ukraine. And that was one of the cities. And I remember we were talking about an NPR article about that city in particular. And they were like, it was very pro-Russian in 2014, but now it's not so pro-Russian. And they're pretending like that was just the logical conclusion everyone living there came to, because the government in Kiev was just so great and Russia was so horrible that they all decided to turn their backs on Russia. Not so. It was because You've got literal Nazis, military units of Nazis roving the country, intimidating, coercing, and putting down any sort of pro-Russian sentiment. And these are people who are ethnic Russians, and so they were coerced and terrorized into silence. And if you went into a city where you had ethnic Russians and it wasn't beyond Kiev's control, these people would be afraid to speak out. I've seen this happen in Thailand, in Thai politics. The U.S.-backed groups at the height of their influence and violence, they scared people into speaking out. Angelo, you saw that in Hong Kong. And so now this city, they acted as if this were to happen, if Russia were to take this city, all of the people would rise up against Russia. I find that highly unlikely, but we'll have to wait and see. And we'll have to wait and see if that is actually a confirmed fact or just because the fog of war, they say. But it's very interesting and very important to keep that background information about it. Let's see what else.
Yes, you mentioned that there's a silent majority in Ukraine, that their voices are not being heard. I mean, right now, you have to imagine there's lots of military, political opponents that are put in jail. And even those opponents are not even pro-Russian. I mean, internal politics there, it's just no more democracy. It's a dictatorship. And you have always on the background the violent mobs, like neo-Nazi. And the West has been all along trying to whitewash those movements. There's a vote at the UN condemning the glorification of Nazis. And guess which countries actually voted against that? Only 2 countries in the world. You have Ukraine and the US. I mean, imagine you are Russian and what you lived through the World War II. The US never, they were not attacked on their own soil. How many people died in the US? Maybe 100,000. I mean, it was very marginal. For Russian, 27 million. So there's not a single family in Russia that was not affected by that. So it's a trauma. So when you have next door neo-Nazis and what they want, they're extremely anti-Russian, and they're threatening you. They want to join NATO, and it's becoming an aggression. What do you want to do? Up to a certain level, Putin waited 8 years. He waited 8 years, and all along Donbass. I mean, Donbass is this eastern region populated by a majority of Russians, is being bombed. We're talking about civilians. You know how many died? 14,000. 14,000 civilians died. Have you heard about those news? I mean, the West never reported that. So we are talking about militaries that are bombing civilians, and civilians that they've been living 8 years into basements. Imagine your life completely destroyed. You're living in a basement. And so all this random shelling. So what Putin is doing here is protecting Russian population that are living in Ukraine. And he's been telling the world all along just to stop that. There are Minsk agreements. You have to abide by the Minsk agreement. And they never did.
And it's interesting, if you look at countries with the largest diasporas in the world, Ukraine is within, it's at least in the top 10, maybe even higher than that. And they have something like 7% of their population lives in Russia. And a lot of it has to do with what has happened since 2014. I mean, a lot of countries have large diasporas. There's a lot of reasons why you might have that. But in Ukraine's situation, it is definitely because before 2014, you have to remember, there was a government in power. It was not the best government ever in the history of the world, but it was playing both sides. It had a constructive relationship with Russia, had a constructive relationship with Europe. It didn't want to go too far in either direction. And inside of Ukraine, it was a political compromise between all of these extremes in different directions. And then from 2014 onward, the U.S. Violently overthrew that government. They handpicked a replacement government, put it into power, and then they took Ukraine and put it on a path of just irrational confrontation with Russia, cutting all kinds of ties that Ukraine depended on for things like its economy to function. They have these nuclear power plants. A lot of that was done in cooperation with Russia. Once you cut all of these ties, you're hurting yourself. It makes no sense. And we're going to probably get into this later on in depth, but I like to compare it to Taiwan. People say you cannot compare Ukraine and Taiwan. In many ways you can. In many ways, Taiwan has been put on a very irrational path away from the mainland. And it is just hurting itself. There is no future. This path goes off of a cliff. And Ukraine is showing what happens when you reach the edge of the cliff and you never slow down. You fly off the edge of the cliff. This is what we're watching in Ukraine right now. Their economy destroyed over the last 8 years. The society divided. People and territory hemorrhaging out of the country. This is what happens. And now today we see these military operations taking place. This is going to be a problem for Ukraine. This is what happens when you team up with the US and you allow your government and your people to be captured by foreign interests. We keep hearing about a Russian invasion, Russian capture and occupation of Ukraine. It's already occupied. It's been occupied since 2014 by US interests, captive, as a captive nation. And we have to remember that in the halls of NATO, the Atlantic Council, the National Endowment for Democracy, all they have talked about for years and years and years is expanding NATO and the EU up to the borders of Russia and then taking Russia itself. Now, I want to play this video. People familiar with my work have already heard. This is Victoria Nuland back in 2014 talking about all the billions the US invested in Ukraine's political system. Let's see if I could get this playing properly.
In 1991, the United States has supported Ukrainians as they build democratic skills and institutions, as they promote civic participation and good governance, all of which are preconditions for Ukraine to achieve its European aspirations. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine. Since Ukraine's...
Okay, so if Russia or China admitted that they poured $5 billion into America's political system, would this be deemed acceptable, or would this be seen as blatant foreign interference? And again, you have to remember, we looked at that Guardian article. The West admits that they are interfering in elections and the composition of governments that come into power. This is blatant interference, blatant capture of a nation's political system. Angelo, looks like you have something you want to add to that.
Yeah. Well, the peak of the tension in Ukraine in Maidan during the Maidan Revolution. At some point, they reached an agreement. The opposition and Yanukovych, they reached an agreement, and so they agreed on elections. Like a earlier date election. And even the EU was present there, and who prevented the peace were the right sector, the neo-Nazis. I mean, all along they were actually the one that created problems, and the neo-Nazis were backed by the US. So this is why at some point Yanukovych had to flee Ukraine. And he had to flee. He went to first to Crimea, and then he left for Russia as a refugee. I mean, Yanukovych was not even pro-Russian, was actually kind of a very anti-Russian. Because, well, the root of the problem was that they at some point, Ukraine had two choices. They had a free trade agreement proposition from the EU. And it was, those propositions, they didn't come even with money. And it was actually, you had to liberalize your whole economy, and it was unacceptable. We are talking about job losses, pension cuts, and so on. It wasn't acceptable. Russia, on the contrary, came with a $15 billion loan, and much more acceptable. You didn't have those liberal preconditions, so it was more acceptable. So he was in between. He was trying to get the best deal, and he was deposed because he just postponed the EU signature, and at the last minute when he saw the proposal from the EU, he said, no, I can't accept that. So you see, it's the EU and the US, they were asking Yanukovych, you are either with us or against us, and you can't, what Ukraine, the best position for Ukraine was a Finland position, neutral like Switzerland. Why you have to side completely with Russia or Europe? I mean, and remember, there are hundreds of years of history linked between Russia and Ukraine. Kiev used to be the capital of Russia. There's a long history behind this. I just want to add something. There's a breaking news. Ukrainian Su-27 has landed in Bacău air base in Romania. It seems like what Putin is doing right now is destroying, like the army, all the infrastructure. And what they're trying to do is, it's a bit similar. Remember when the Iraqis, they flew all their planes to Iran, they had to salvage what they could. That's what is actually happening in Ukraine, because I expect between 48 hours, I mean, really a lot of military infrastructure to be destroyed. And I mean, Ukraine would be easy just to wipe out the military in 7 days. And I would even expect that in some areas that you would have actually Ukrainians military to defect. Remember in Donbass in 2014, because the people in Donbass, they didn't accept the coup in Kiev. You had lots of militaries, 75% of the militaries in Donbass, they defected because they did not accept the government, the puppet government in Kiev. So you might expect military in Ukraine that actually will defect. They would defect because the government they have is not their government.
I want you to continue, but I just want to add on real quick. Even Vice, which is this ridiculous Western propaganda outlet, it's CNN with neckbeards and in horn-rimmed glasses. Even they said they were in Crimea, and they said when the decision was made to start pivoting toward Russia and rejoin Russia, I think it was like 80-something% of the military just immediately defected over to Russia. They wanted nothing to do with what was going on in Kiev. And so, I mean, that's Vice. That's not Russian media. That is Western media, anti-Russian media. And even they had to admit that. And again, and then I want you to continue, Angelo, but if you read the Western media itself, it's always buried, but it's always there. The truth is always there. They'll get people to read the headlines in the first paragraph. Somewhere much further down in the article is the rest of the story. That's basically what we've been doing. Angelo and I, we've been doing this in our different ways for a long time, trying to show people that even the Western media is admitting this. If you really look at Angelo, please continue. You were talking about Donbass and how many people defected there as well, and had no interest in supporting the new U.S. hand-picked regime in Kiev.
Yes, the same as Crimea. The West, they hammered us all along, saying there was an invasion of Crimea. It's not true. Actually, Russian troops were already there. Sevastopol, it's an army base that was leased from Ukraine to Russia. So you had actually the Russian army that was already in Crimea. And what happens that you had, it used to be, for a long time, it used to be Russian. Khrushchev gave it as a gift, just to Ukraine, but it was all Russian. And people, once they saw that neo-Nazi had taken power in Kiev, they didn't want to be part of that. They had elected Yanukovych. And well, imagine, it's the same as in the US, if you are for Biden and then there's a coup and it doesn't represent who you voted for, then you are going to go into the street and say, that's not my government. And especially here, we have to, there's an ethnic element here. You have a government in Kiev that is going to say, well, you know what, we are going to wipe out your culture. You won't be able, in school, we are not going to teach you language. Eastern Ukraine, you have 90%. Mariupol right now, Mariupol is being bombed right now. Mariupol, you have 90% of the people that they claim their mother language is Russian. So when you're telling those people, imagine the US, you have some areas where you're going to tell people, well, you know what, your mother language is English, well, we're going to change it. Or it's Spanish, well, no more Spanish, that's it. In addition to that, even media, They're suppressing Russian-speaking media completely. They shut down 8 the major Russian-speaking media in Ukraine. How's that?
And real quick,
yeah.
And real quick, on the screen is Human Rights Watch is a completely fake rights organization that exists solely to help advance U.S. foreign policy objectives, including in Ukraine. And when you read through this, you'll probably notice that they're downplaying and spinning this. But this is a language law that is suppressing the Russian language in Ukraine. This is what Human Rights Watch accuses China of doing without any evidence at all in regards to the Uyghurs. This is Ukraine openly doing it and passing legislation. And this is Human Rights Watch doing damage control and trying to spin it while also claiming, hey, we mentioned that. We did. It wasn't a big campaign like what we've done against Russia or China, but we mentioned it one time just to show you Angelo is not making this up. This is what's going on in Ukraine. It is a full spectrum war against anything perceived as Russian, and Ukraine and Russia are inseparable culturally, historically, linguistically. There's so many commonalities. You cannot just cut it. It's just like Taiwan pretending that it's somehow separate from the mainland. It makes no sense. It's completely artificial, and it only serves one circle of special interests, and they are in Washington. They're not in any of these places actually being affected. Please continue, Angelo.
Just news that just came out. DPR opens humanitarian corridor for Ukrainian soldiers who wish to lay down their weapons and surrender. So this is what I just said just before. I think we're expecting a lot of militaries in Ukraine to lay down their arms. What happens that you need to imagine, and there's a lot of Ukrainians don't want to fight their brothers in Donbass. They want peace. The ones that are going to fight on the Ukrainian side are going to be the most radical, the Azov battalion, the right sectors, those neo-Nazis forces. But otherwise, you could expect a lot of Ukrainians that actually are going to lay down their weapons, especially the ones that actually are Russian, ethnic Russians. So it's a big news. I think they're trying, or they're trying to get actually the Ukrainian army on their side. And it's important to see. I mean, what is the goal right now? What is the objective of Putin? Is target militaries and denazification. It's very clear. 2 things, and I think it doesn't want to touch civilians. And you see, there's no. This is why actually Kiev, all the big cities, there's no evacuation of civilians because they know that Putin is not going to target civilians. But of course, you could expect accidents. Civilians, of course, some civilians will die. That's a reality. And it's sad. But again, Putin has been telling Ukraine all along for 8 years. For 8 years, the government in Kiev never wanted to talk to the Donbass people. So how can you reach an agreement when you don't want to talk to those people for 8 years? The only one that they wanted to talk to was Russia. So you want to talk to Russia, and then you say, well, Russia is going against us, and they're doing meddling. Well, you know what? Russia doesn't want to meddle. Why don't you talk directly to the people that you're actually shelling? And you're talking them. You're calling 2 million people in Donbass terrorists, and you're telling the people in Donbass that once you get back to Donbass, you are going to hang those people. You're going to gather them into camps, and you're gonna do mass punishment. What do you think the Donbass people are thinking? They're going to protect their house, protect themselves, and this is why actually they got in 2014 and 15, Ukrainian forces got a beating. A huge. It was a humiliation. They got to Minsk agreement because Ukrainian army forces, they got a beating from civilian militia. Do you know why? Because civilian militia, they're fighting for their home. There's a huge difference. When you are conscript from Ukrainian army and you're fighting your brothers, do you think there's going to be a motivation? No, there's no motivation there. So who's protecting their home is the Donbass people, because they know what's coming up for them. ethnic genocide, culture genocide, and they don't want that. They're protecting their homes.
Yeah, and thousands of people have died. This isn't like the U.S. accusing China of genocide in Xinjiang and having no body count at all, no evidence that anyone has died. And this is Ukraine shelling entire areas openly. Everyone can see it. There's observers there from Europe watching this. There's no doubt that they're killing people there, including civilians. And if you look at the deaths, maybe this is a good time to tell people who they should be following right now. Aaron Mate from Gray Zone does a really good job when it comes to Russia, America's hysteria, paranoia, and just outright lies about Russia. And he was talking about how you have these statistics, and if you look at them carefully, you can see that most of the civilians dying are in the Donbas region, targeted by Ukrainian military forces. Now, I watched a lot of footage from both sides when the combat was at its height, and you could tell that the only people who were really enthusiastic about killing their countrymen were the Nazi battalions. And then other than that, you had these conscripts who were totally disinterested, completely unprepared for it. It was just like putting meat into the grinder. It was horrible. And you could even see the fighters in eastern Ukraine fighting against these forces sent by Kiev. You could see how disheartened they were to be killing these really young guys who they knew didn't even want to be there. But if it's a choice between letting them kill your family and destroy your neighborhood, or killing someone who doesn't even want to really be there but are still pointing a gun at you, it's a tough choice to make. And this is a choice that the U.S. has been forcing Ukrainians to make for 8 years now. So people should keep that in mind.
Just going back to live stuff, my expectation really is that this war is not going to last long. I'm expecting defection, massive defection from Ukrainian army. I have this new report from Russia Mode. Reconnaissance data show that units and servicemen of the Ukrainian army are massively leaving their positions, abandoning their weapons. The position of units of the Ukrainian army that have laid down their arms are not subjected to strikes. So you see they're opening an opportunity for those Ukrainian army just to lay down their arms and go into Donbas. So there's a humanitarian corridor that is being created right now. Because the goal is not to destroy Ukraine. The goal is to demilitarize Ukraine and to make sure that there's a denazification. They are going to aim at those Nazi battalions. And I mean, personally, I support that. I mean, this is 21st century, having those neo-Nazi movements inside Europe that are threatening Russia. I understand fully where Putin is coming from and why he's doing what he is doing.
And I just want people to realize, because I have to tell you, I was disheartened yesterday. I spent almost all day on social media arguing with people about why Nazis are bad. I never thought that in the year 2022, I would have to argue with people to convince them that Nazis are bad, and that countries standing up entire military formations made exclusively of Nazis. That is wrong, and that should be stopped. That is unacceptable. And what we're watching is not Russian media. This is Time Magazine, who did a whole report on Azov Battalion, a standing military formation funded and armed and directed by Kiev. These are Nazis. These are Nazis. And he's interviewing them, and they're talking about the Aryan race and how, after World War II, we had to sit on the bench, but we're back off the bench now. These are Nazis. This is the scum of Ukrainian society that the U.S. has pulled out of the gutter and put in the front. And what happens when you do that to a country? You destroy the country. They've done this one country after the other. Ukraine is the latest victim. I'm sorry. I mean, if you're a Nazi and you're a Hail Hitler Nazi, you're scum. I'm sorry. I'm not one to call names most of the time, but I'll make an exception for this. I cannot make an exception. This is an armed military formation in Ukraine right now, Azov Battalion. And I've had people tell me, "Oh, Brian, that was 2014." This is 2021. Look at the date here. This report was filed 2021. The Atlantic Council, inveterate Russophobe war propagandists. The Azov regiment has not depoliticized. They're admitting that they're still neo-Nazis in Azov Battalion. This is March 2020. And you could go back to, say, 2015, same story. So it's consistent from 2014 to present day. The Western media itself has admitted that these Nazis are in Ukraine and that they are a central pillar of Ukraine's security apparatus. It's not a fringe movement. It's not a street gang. These are official military formations wearing uniforms under a banner sanctioned by Kiev. It's unacceptable. And if Russia says they're going to denazify Ukraine, I mean, imagine this. I don't know which is worse, not being outraged that there's Nazis in Ukraine or being outraged that people want to stop them. I don't know which is worse, but this is what we'll see across the Western media. Angelo, you want to jump in and say anything about that? I'm showing people this from Reuters.
Well, I'd like to take a bit higher view. I mean, what the US is trying to do here is to have Russia to decouple from Europe. I mean, really, if you really look at what is happening, it's about, and it's two fronts. There's a China front and a Russian front. They want Russia to decouple from Europe, and they want China. They're trying to do the same in Southeast Asia, and it didn't work so far. You know, decoupling economies. Why decoupling economies? If you want to go into a Cold War, that's what you need to do. That's the first step. So they want Russia to decouple from Europe. But Russia is selling a lot of gas to Europe. So there is Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2, we're talking about 50 billion I think it's a billion metric cubes per year. If you make the calculation, we are talking about $100 billion of revenues for Russia, and more dependence of Germany on Russian gas. But actually, this is not extra need from Germany. This would replace expensive liquefied gas that actually right now Germany is buying from Qatar and the US. So the US doesn't want that. You know, it's business that they're losing on one side, and on the other side, you know, it's Russia that is going to be richer. You know, there are so huge reserves, gas and oil reserves from Russia, and because of that, you know, it goes against the plan of the US, which is containing Russia and give sanctions and to make the economy scream with the hope of having a coup, similar, you know, a color revolution in Russia, you know, like people going against their government and maybe having a US puppet regime put in place. I mean, they've been saying this all along. We've talked about this. There's a Rand paper. Maybe later you can actually find this Rand paper. There's clearly stating what is the goal, and keeping in mind those think tank papers, who are funding those papers. Those are actually advanced indicators. They're actually teaching the politicians, you know, what are the directions to take. This is what people need to read. If you want to see what is the directions, the geopolitical direction of the US, that's what you need to read. And who finances those think tanks? The military-industrial complex. It's all about money. It's about keeping those tensions because they want to sell weapons. So
just to jump in real quick, it's not only weapon manufacturers who obviously stand the most to profit during peacetime when they're threatening war, and obviously during war itself. It's also big banks. It's also all of these huge corporate monopolies in the West that shut down all competition at home and are trying to shut down all competition abroad, and have this gigantic collective pyramid scheme where they're just constantly expanding, exploiting, taking over, destroying. And when they run out of things to do that to, that's when an empire collapses. This is where we are right now. And here, I just thought this is what we were talking about earlier. This is what the US disrupted in 2014 when they decided to overthrow the elected government and put in a regime that would irrationally create problems with Russia and pivot too hard west toward the US. And a little bit toward Europe, but mostly toward the US. This is Henry Kissinger, is not a great guy, not a friend of Russia. And he said, if Ukraine is to survive and thrive, it must not be either side's outpost against the other. It should function as a bridge between them. That's what we were saying before 2014. And it worked. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And because the US jumped in there, artificially pivoted Ukraine west, cutting all of its ties with Ukraine, has gutted the economy, divided society, caused it to lose territory, and we still don't know what the full extent of the damage is. Again, this is your reward when you sell your country out to the U.S. This is what happens. Angelo?
Well, it's interesting. There's two positions. The Democrats and the Republicans had different strategies. You see, I mean, for the U.S., they could either do what they're doing now. They're fighting on both fronts, Russia and China. And when you're doing that, what you're doing is that you're pushing Russia in the arms of China. So there's a major integration of the economies right now between Russia and China. Lots of partnership, long-term plans, Belt and Road Initiative. There's also gas supply, oil supply, and that's extremely important for China. The Republicans, they were more pragmatic. They were saying we shouldn't do that. We should not antagonize Russia. And remember, Putin, he said it the other day. He said he had talks with Clinton, saying, he asked him, "Can I join NATO? Can I join NATO? I mean, NATO, you're expanding NATO. You promised in the 1990s you wouldn't expand NATO eastward." And he actually came forward and said, "Can I join NATO?" I mean, somehow you can influence NATO if you're inside. I mean, somehow. And once you have NATO at your door, you start being worried. I mean, what is the purpose of NATO? NATO was there to counterbalance, the USSR and the what we call the Warsaw Pact. And that was the only goal. It's North Atlantic Treaty. Now it's a global hegemonic project. It's the Washington Consensus. It's this vision of a new world. I mean, I know you don't like the term, but new world order. I mean, it's neo-colonialism. It's
the international rules-based order that the U.S. is self-proclaimed leader of.
Yes, exactly. And the weapons are different. It's through coercion, it's through sanctions, it's through the US dollar hegemony. I mean, the US dollar hegemony, that is the ultimate. It's one thing to have boots on the ground, but the ultimate goal is controlling the economy. And the US dollar hegemony has started since after the World War II. There's a Bretton Woods agreement, and now there are reforms. Now you have large economies like China, and they're reshuffling. The cards are different right now, and the US and the West is going against that because they are going to lose this war, because it's all about money. Ultimately, it's all about money. Here now, why do we have this tension in Ukraine? Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 is actually going to make Russia, they are going to make $100 billion per year. And the lifetime of Nord Stream 2, it could be 30, 40 years. I mean, we are talking about trillions of dollars. So it comes down to not ideology, that's money. That's money. And they don't want this money to go into the pocket of Russian, and they'd rather sell more expensive gas to Europeans. So you see, Europeans are hostages. You are going to buy more expensive gas, not from Russia, but from the US. You know what I call this? I call this a wealth transfer. If you are Europeans, you should go against this. Why should I buy more expensive gas to make Wall Street companies richer? So you see, every time, if you take a step back, it's about money, it's about control, and ultimately it's the US dollar hegemony. Once the dollar is no more the main global currency, then you could expect the US economy to collapse, because they're living they have a high standard of living because they can afford to print money. That's all they're doing.
I think that's a good point to repeat. The U.S. was sabotaged. Look, they're saying Russia is this huge threat to Europe, yet Europe is doing business with Russia. And when the U.S. talks like this, what they're basically saying is that they think Europe are too stupid to know what their own security risks and threats and interests are, and that the U.S. has to decide for them. And when they say Russia is this big threat, what they're actually trying to do is drive a wedge between Russia and Europe. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline, like you said, this was a project, not just a Russian project, it was a European project. European companies involved, European companies that were going to benefit from that by and that's all they did. And it didn't matter who was president. They all tried to oppose it, sabotage it, derail it. They did the Alexei Navalny, what was it? The Novichok poisoning. Ridiculous, just completely ridiculous. And they flew Navalny to Germany specifically to plop him right in the middle of the debate so that they could derail Nord Stream 2. It's childish. It's absurd. And Europe is being held hostage by the US just as much as Ukraine is being held hostage by the US since 2014. And Angelo, what you said about getting them to buy more expensive fuel, energy from the US, this is transferring wealth out of Europe to the United States to give Western and American, specifically American imperialism, another breath to keep on living, to just perpetuate it a little bit longer. What I've got here is a live map, and it's updated. This is not something that you can go off of as 100% fact. It's a mixture of confirmed reports, propaganda, known propaganda, unknown propaganda. The people who run this have a pro-Western slant, so they'll always try to present information in favor of Western objectives, but you can still get a pretty clear picture of what's going on by looking at it. And Kharkov right up here.
Brian, sorry if I cut you. Would you be open if we have Patrick Lancaster joining us?
If he can, yes, if he can.
If it might be, let's see. I'm just gonna try to send, to see. Let's see if he, is Patrick Lancaster is there on the ground in Donbass, and he might be able to join us. I'm just gonna send in the StreamYard invitation. Let's see if he can join us. Okay,
sure.
Sorry.
Sure, I'll keep an eye on that. Yeah, so this map, we'll keep an eye on this as well. You have Russian media talking about Ukrainian troops laying down weapons. We'll have to see, if this is actually happening on a large scale. The West isn't going to be able to cover it up. So it'll be interesting how the West presents that information to the public. We'll have to wait and see. And again, anyone who's watching this, the comment section there is for people to also share news tips. So if you see something, please just give us the source so we can find it and put it up on the screen. We're covering, if you're just joining us, we're covering live the military operations ongoing in Ukraine, carried out by the Russian military. And this is in response to literally decades of US and NATO encroachment, encirclement, and containment. As a matter of fact, I have this paper right here. It's called Strategy of Constrainment. I mean, that's what it's literally titled. And it's about encircling, containing, and overthrowing the political order inside Russia, and then incorporating Russia into this free and whole Europe that the United States is building, where, as you can see with Germany, you're not free to do anything. You're free to do what the US tells you. And whatever you do will be for US interests first. And if it's also in your interest, you're lucky. Because if it's not in your interest, the US doesn't care. And that's the whole story of Nord Stream 2 in a nutshell. And so, like, again, what the US is always doing is this projection where they're telling you Russia is trying to infringe on the freedom of Europe. And yet the US is point blank telling Germany, you're not going to build that pipeline with Russia because we said so. The United States on the other side of the Atlantic, you're not allowed to build a pipeline with Russia. You can't do it. You're not allowed. Angelo, you have you seen this or papers like this? This is, again, out of the Atlantic Council, funded by the U.S. government. The U.S. State Department is one of the Atlantic Council's sponsors and is deeply involved in their policy proposals.
Yes. Well, we have the similar papers coming from the RAND Corporation, How to Contain China. Remember, we covered that before. They were saying that there's a window of opportunity for the West, for the US, between 2015 and 2025 to contain China, because China is actually building, capacity, defense capacity. And after 2025, it will be too late. So RAND Corporation is saying, well, just go quick. You got to contain China. Because China is getting, they're getting too big in South China Sea. But again, South China Sea, that is the front yard of China. That's not US front yard. That's very interesting, when the US is actually using this word front yard. I mean, they're using front yard for South America. Well, I can understand that. Okay, maybe. But they're using Africa, they're using Asia, the term of front yard. It's not. Look at the map. Where is Ukraine? How far is Ukraine from the US? Why did you meddle all the way there? When you have two brothers, Ukrainians and Russians, they share the same history. You have most of Ukrainians have family in Russia, and now they're fighting each other. And this is what it does. I mean, this is what they do. It's the usual divide and control, and you have different ways to do that. It could be through religion, through ethnicity, and that's what they did in Ukraine. It takes one generation to brainwash people, saying, well, you know what, you don't have any Russian roots. You are Ukrainian. You have your language, and you're superior. And that's how they did. The same as they did with the Mujahideen and the terrorists, they did it with the Nazis. And now what you have in Ukraine is this whitewashing of Nazi movement. You have the EU and the US, they're investing to making movies, and even some movies are going to be they're going to be in Netflix, and it's about the glorification of Nazi, the whitewashing, saying, well, movies, there's this violence, this cool violence for Nazis, and making it something normal, the new normal. And that's very dangerous. It's about brainwashing a whole new generation on being superior. It's the same as what happened in Hong Kong. Remember, in Hong Kong, they told kids for 20 years, a full generation, telling kids, you know what, you are Hong Kongese. You're Hong Kongese. You are actually better than mainland Chinese. You from the West. And they're doing the same in Taiwan, rewriting history books, saying, well, you know what, you are Taiwanese. And so you have this clash in Taiwan where you have the parents, they know they're Chinese, and the kids, they've been brainwashed through, it's this new generation, selfie, Instagram, and so on, and Hollywood watching Netflix and saying, well, we are Westerners. Can you imagine Taiwan is saying, you Westerners, how absurd is that? And that's what they do. It's about the soft power.
Yes.
Soft power. People buy into this soft power. This is why they're pushing Hollywood, because it's a very useful tool. If you've been watching all your life Hollywood movies, you identify yourself to this culture.
Yes, and the thing with Taiwan, it's just crazy when you debate with people with this mindset, this poisoned mindset, where they're parroting all of these things that they've been exposed to. And you have to remember, they're like, Taiwan has nothing to do with China, and I have to remind them that the government is literally calling it the Republic of China. So you do have a little bit to do with China. Your own constitution admits Taiwan is a province of wider China, and so there's no logic. There is no truth. These people are brainwashed. They are in an alternate universe. It's a lot, and not to, well, because there are real Nazis involved in Ukraine, it's a lot like the original Nazis. These people were living in their own dimension. They were so disconnected from reality, and even all the way up to the leadership, they made decisions that made absolutely no sense, and they led the entire country off of a cliff. And we've watched it happen time and time again with U.S. proxies. Angelo, I don't know if you know this guy, Paul Mason. Do you know Paul Mason? Have you ever seen this guy on Twitter? He's in Kiev, and this guy is just, again, in his own little universe. He's talking about militarily, this will take weeks. The Ukrainian military has prepared for mobile defense, breakout from encirclement, urban warfare. It's meager air defense. We're overwhelmed. However, the political question is whether the government capitulates to cut its losses. UK sources expect key political figures to become targets for kidnap and assassination. Ukraine was not doing good even in the best of times since 2014. It is its own worst enemy. When you have a corrupt client regime beholden to foreign interests, these are often people who are their own worst enemies, even in the best of times. This is not going to be the time where they shine and persevere. I guarantee you that. They have their own problems with themselves, even if everything else was taken off the table. This is Paul Mason. introducing Paul Mason. This is the type of people out there pushing this anti-Russian propaganda and this idea that Ukraine is somehow a victim in all. I mean, it is when you really think about it, but not a victim of Russia, a victim of the United States and the UK to a certain extent, because he's from the UK. Angelo, what's your take on this guy's?
Well, it's just absurd. I don't know in which world they're living in. I'm just going to give you a few indications. I mean, this is all factual. You know, the economy of Ukraine is much lower. The GDP is much lower than in the 1990s. The GDP per capita is one of the few countries in the world that is the GDP per capita is lower than 30 years ago. You know, Ukrainians under the USSR was much more well off than it is now. You have 8 million Ukrainians that left Ukraine. You know where they're working? They're working in the EU as a cheap labor. So, you know, all the young workforce, they left. You have 2 million refugees from Ukraine that left for Russia. So you have a population of 54 million that has been reduced by 10 million people. Additional to that, you have a U.S. puppet regime. It's extremely corrupted. You know, you have recently, you know, those papers, Pandora papers. You have Zelensky. They find out that Zelensky has offshore accounts, and Zelensky came into power. You know what he promised to people? I mean, by the way, Zelensky is a comedian. You know, he used to be a comedian.
A literal clown.
A literal clown. And he came into power. You know, he was the hope of Ukraine. He came into power with two things. He said, I'm going to reunite Donbass, first thing. And second thing, I'm going to get rid of corruption. The first thing that happened is that we find out that he's backed by an oligarch, you know, and he has offshore accounts. So he's as corrupted as all the other ones. And besides that, you know, what happened with the reunification of Donbass, on the contrary, is hawkish. And I suspect that maybe Zelensky is actually a hostage of the US, you know, another hostage. So his popularity went from 73%. He was voted when he was elected. He was the hope of Ukraine. Now his popularity, we are talking about 20 to 25%. So this is the vicious circle of elected regret. So you see, you have a failed state. When you have lost 10 million of your population in a decade, you are a failed state. You have a neo-Nazi government. What do you expect? Do you think the people that are fighting right now in the Ukrainian army, they are going to be willing to die for this government? They're not. They're going to lay down their arms. And this fight, what is happening right now in Ukraine, it's not going to last long. Because you are going to have lots of defections. They're going to be like, what's the point? What's the point? I don't want to fight with this U.S. puppet government. And again, you know, it's about the violent minority in Ukraine, which is controlling the silent majority. You know, to control a country, you don't need many people. You know, the vast majority of people are not politicized. You can have, if you have a minority of radicals, you can take over a whole country. Maidan Revolution happened because you had 2,000 to 3,000 radicals that took over the power. So you have 3,000 people that take over the power in a country of over 50 million people. And that's the reality. Those revolutions, again, it's not 50% of the population going to the street. It's about a very small minority of radicals that are willing to kill to topple a government.
Yeah. I'm not going to make any predictions because modern day warfare is it's very hard to predict what will happen, how a campaign that's supposed to be fast ends up dragging out, things that were supposed to happen or play out don't. So I'm going to be very careful about that. I would like to hope that it's very quick and that the people of Ukraine do not lay their lives down for this corrupt puppet regime run by and for Washington. I would really hope that they didn't. I want to point this out right here. And Angelo, you've got a lot of experience seeing things like this. Who's this guy? He's from Wall Street Journal. So already it's the deck is stacked against him. And he's talking about how China is not talking about Ukraine at all. It's not a news story, because China should be concerned about all of the things the West is concerned about. If not, what's wrong with them? But I highly doubt that. I think that in China they are, but this is what they always do. Can you think of any examples where they said China's not talking about it? And yeah, I think that it was Eileen Gu winning, and they said no one was talking about that. And then people showed how it was exploding all over Chinese media. Angelo, I'm going to give you the floor. I got to go get some more coffee. I will be right back. And Angelo, if you need a break, just let me know. If you're just joining us, we're covering live the ongoing Russian operations in Ukraine as Russia draws its red line and says this far and no further to U.S. NATO expansion up to its border. Angelo?
Yeah, well, I think there's the West. What they try to do when it comes to Russia is to associate to China China to what is happening in Ukraine, because it's about having a common front. They wish that China had a common front with Russia, and China will never do that. Maybe on the background, China is actually supporting Russia in this against this globalist agenda. Of course, there's the U.S. and the West is attacking what we call this new multipolar world, which is and on the front you have Russia and China, and so somehow China, there's a support, but they're not completely full in. They don't support sedition. They're against that, but then they are not going to have put a veto at the UN against the Russia. There's an alliance. It's a de facto alliance, and but China, they prefer to be low key on that. They have their own problem, and the focus of China, it's focusing on their people and the economy. China is self-centered. China doesn't have imperialistic aspiration, and if you look at history, it's very obvious. China was never about expanding. What is happening right now is China is becoming the largest economy. When you look at purchasing power parity, China is the largest economy in the world already. Now, if it's a GDP nominal, it's still second, and it should surpass the US in 2028. But because China has such a large population, it's de facto, of course, it's going to become the largest economy. But when you look at expanding military, China doesn't have the 800 army bases that the US has. China is an army base in Djibouti in Africa, but that's all. It's peace because of peacekeeping forces. What China wants to do, it's to focus on its economy, and culturally, China is self-centered. They're centered on their own people. In China itself, we need to look at China not as a country, but as a continent. China is its own problem. It's only focusing on bringing prosperity to its people. And look at the 40 years of Chinese history. You have 700 million people that were lifted out of extreme poverty. So China is not going to fall into this trap. The trap that the US wants to put China into. So here, I think the trend that we are going to see, Brian, when it comes to Western media, is to associate China to this so-called Russian aggression on Ukraine, and China is going to be neutral on that. Actually, China is not supporting much sedition, for the simple reason that China is its own problem when it comes to Taiwan. But then there are some similarities with Taiwan. It's Taiwan's democracy has been hijacked by the West.
Yes.
They've done the same as in Ukraine. Chen Shui-bian, which is he was president of Taiwan, and also from the DPP, the same party of President Tsai Ing-wen. He started actually changing the history books, when he was in power. So now you have this new generation of kids. They come out and they say, we're not Chinese, we're Taiwanese. And there are lots of advanced indicators in Taiwan that is showing that it's similar to what happened in Ukraine. It's happening in Taiwan. This whole brainwashing. You have also, open society, National Endowment for Democracy, they're all present in Taiwan. So there's a hijacking of democracy. And there was already a color revolution back in Taiwan, you know, the Sunflower Revolution in 2014. You know, China was supposed, you know, it was getting extremely close to Taiwan. They were talking about, you know, reunification. The Kuomintang KMT president Ma Ying-jeou, he had trade agreements. So what did they do? They started to fund those movements, anti-Chinese movements, and you had those kids going into the street saying, well, no, we need to protect our sovereignty. We want to fight against this trade agreement. And so you see, it was a trade agreement back then in Taiwan, the same as in 2014 in Maidan Revolution. You see the similarities.
Yes, it's almost exactly the same game on both.
Ukraine was getting too close to Russia. Then you have people starting to go into the streets, you know, and you have to ask the question: was it an Ukrainian, you know, idea, you know, or was it planted by the West? The same as in Taiwan. You know, the idea of independence in Taiwan, is it a Taiwanese initiative or is it an idea planted by the West? You see, every time, we need to look at the root of the problem. And so the funding, who funds which party and so on. You know, it's always about follow the money.
Yeah, and I mean, with Taiwan and with Ukraine, these are two central policy areas that the U.S. is focused on, because it has openly and repeatedly over the years, doesn't matter who's in the White House, they've talked about we need to encircle and contain Russia and China. They've talked about encircling China all the way back to the 60s, the 50s. And before that, the U.S. literally had troops in China. Now, let's get back to Ukraine. And again, this is a preview of what Taiwan has to look forward to if they decide to keep going down the path with the U.S. This is Michael McFaul. He was a diplomat. He was in Russia. This guy has been rooting for this the whole time, and he knew how this was going to end. He knew it was going to end in tragedy for Ukraine. He did the exact same thing for Georgia. He does the exact same thing for all of these countries that are victimized by the U.S., put in the firing line by the U.S. to pay the full price for advancing U.S. foreign policy objectives against Russia. Let's just take a look at some of his tweets. I think it says a lot. Putin invaded Ukraine again on Army Day, not a coincidence. How do you invade a country if you already invaded and you were supposedly there this entire time? How do you invade again? I don't get that. So that's Michael McFaul contradicting himself. And then he says, let's get it done. President of the United States and other leaders of the free world tomorrow. And what is on the list? Devastating sanctions on Russia now, including SWIFT. And all that's going to do is render SWIFT moot, because everyone will shift to something else. Once they know that SWIFT is going to go after you if you oppose U.S. foreign policy, people are going to stop using it, just like everything else the U.S. has been doing. So sanctions, wow, that's a real surprise move there. I didn't think they would go for that. Fully isolate Russia by all means in all formats. But as far as that's going to go is the U.S. and Europe. That's it. And it's going to hurt Europe more than anyone else. Weapons, equipment for Ukraine. For who? Who's going to still be there tomorrow to take this extra equipment and weapons? Who's going to be there tomorrow to take it and use it? I don't know. That remains to be seen. Financial assistance, again, financial assistance for who? Who's going to be there tomorrow? And humanitarian assistance, well, that's something that they should give, but we all know that they won't and they don't do unless there's some way they can politicize it or abuse it or leverage it in a way to only make the situation worse, as they've done in places like Syria, for example. There was another one that I saw. I think it was this one. On this sad day, the only good news is that this invasion is the beginning of the end for Putin and Putinism. He will never subjugate Ukrainians, never. They will resist by force or other more passive means forever. And of course, that's the dream of people like Michael McFaul, to have other people in other countries fighting for U.S. hegemony until their last breath. That's his dream. And that's what he hopes for, no matter how unrealistic it may seem. Yeah, I see someone in the comment section laughing about Putinism. I mean, this is, I showed you the map. It's NATO up to Russia's doorstep. If it was the other way around, if it was Russia occupying Canada and Mexico, completely encircling the United States, I think the United States would have grounds to be upset and to maybe lash out a little bit. I think that would be understandable. It's more than understandable for Russia, but only the West doesn't see that way, because no matter what the West does, they're always right. No matter what anyone else does, no matter how they've been provoked, they're always wrong. And this is what the Western media is there to do, to force that narrative into place. Angelo, what do you think about Michael McFaul and his tweets? I'm going to check and see if there's anything.
Oh, it's just absurd. Can you check if Patrick is on?
Oh.
You know, maybe he could join us.
I don't see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Otherwise, I get some information here. Actually, Russian paratroopers landing near Kharkov. So I think it's important to, you know, a lot of people, they talk about Donbass, but Donbass is not all into the hands of separatists, Russian separatists. There's only 1/3 of Donbass. What they're aiming at is maybe taking the whole Donbass. Donbass, there's 2 republics. It's Lugansk and Donetsk. So otherwise, a lot of things are happening. There's lots of movements. I think it's going to be 48 hours extremely intensive.
I want to show people a map too, while you're explaining that, because I've had people argue with me about when this all started, and there were Ukrainian forces that actually crossed the border into Russia, and someone actually said, how did they pass all of the rebels without being seen? And people don't understand that these 2 breakaway regions, the entire boundary of the administrative region is not held by these ethnic Russians. The Ukrainian government holds a good part of it as well, including sections on the border with Russia, and that's exactly where they crossed the border. And this just goes to show you how ignorant people are. I'm surprised that they even knew where Ukraine was on the map. That was surprising, but beyond that, they didn't know much. It's quite sad. So maybe this is a good map. It's from CNN. Let me see if I can get it up onto the screen. So you can see Donetsk and Luhansk, and then you can see in red is the area actually held by ethnic Russians resisting control by Kiev. And you can see there's quite a bit of area controlled by Ukrainian forces. And these neo-Nazi battalions that the Western media themselves have reported on, done entire videos on, this is where they are. They're involved in this because they're the only ones enthusiastic about killing other Ukrainians. And it makes sense, because you need to have extremists. You need extremists who don't care what the truth is. And when you're a government like in Kiev working for Washington, you're not going to get normal, balanced people to go along with this and then risk their lives for this. You could only get extremists. That's why in Syria, the only people fighting against Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian government, the Syrian Arab Army, are people like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And this is who the US has had to ally with there. And in Ukraine, extremists who are literal Nazis. And it's a pattern. Everywhere the US goes, they find the lowest in society to team up with against their own country. It's very sad. It's very destructive. And in Ukraine, it is literal Nazis. And people, again, I spent all day yesterday talking to people who were denying it. And then when you showed them Reuters, Atlantic Council, Time Magazine admitting it, trying to downplay or make excuses for it. Could you imagine trying the uphill battle that you have ahead of you when you're trying to convince everyone that Russia is bad, and you're the one also trying to make excuses for actual Nazis? It's surreal. And this is what the Western media has done to people. It's like a lobotomy. They've lobotomized anyone who is still tuning in, removed part of their brain for them to continue going along with this narrative. So clear cut. Angela, you...
yeah, just if you can check if Patrick is you got Patrick online. No, it's very sad. Again, Putin never wanted that. What is happening today. I think if there's we put Putin in a position he had no choice. He's been telling the West all along, just stop that, And again, occupation started a long time ago. You had NATO forces there in Ukraine, training neo-Nazi battalions and so on. So the meddling, NATO was already de facto there. You had NATO office in Kiev, and they were preparing for the next step, which was Ukraine joining NATO. And there was a red line. When you have Putin telling the West all along, it's been 8 years, he's telling the West, we don't want NATO, Ukraine to join NATO, and this is national security. Well, this is a red line. How many times you have to tell the West that they should stop? They're taking this as an aggression, and they wouldn't listen. And at some point, with all the shelling and the threat that Russian population in Donbass had, every day's shelling on Donbass. Well, at some point he said, no, that's going to stop.
Absolutely. Look at this headline too, because I had people trying to explain to me how Russia isn't being threatened at all, and they're overreacting, and they're being provocative, and they're being unprovoked. This is from February 12th, 2022. So it is just this month. Pentagon orders departure of U.S. troops in Ukraine as Russia crisis escalates. There were U.S. troops literally in Ukraine. It doesn't matter how many of them there were. The fact that there were U.S. troops in Ukraine, a nation that borders Russia, a nation that is killing ethnic Russians along Russia's border. This is highly problematic. If it was the other way around, if it was Russia in Canada or China in Mexico, how would the U.S. react to it? Would people say the U.S. was unreasonable for feeling provoked, for feeling that they were being strangled at their own borders? I don't think so. Looks like I have Alex.
Yeah, that's Alex. I think Alex. Okay. So I guess Alex and Patrick. Patrick is going to join us right after, I guess.
Okay, let's see. I'll get Alex on. We're going to join Alex from Reporterfy Media. He is a friend of Patrick. Let's get him on and see what he. Hello, Alex.
Hey guys,
Hi,
can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, guys.
Yes,
I can. Comment section. Please let us know if there's any audio issues. Alex, go ahead. Welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me on the show. And I was listening earlier. You guys were talking about a little bit of the Serbia. I mean, this really kind of reminds me of that 78-day bombing in Syria, where the U.S. needed to kind of crank things up. Well, we are at fever pitch now. So what I've done is, I don't know if the audience knows me. My name is Alex, and I'm with Reporterfy Media. The important part of me coming on here today is I've reached out to someone in the Donbass area who this whole panel already knows. His name is Patrick Lancaster. He right now is in a pretty hot area. Okay, and I mean, the reports that I got from him yesterday was just total carnage, and he is going to try to jump on here any moment. I don't know how stable his mobile connection is going to be, but normally I've known him for a few years. His channel, just to give you some background on him, he's been there from the start, guys, and he's married to a local, lovely girl, has 2 children, and he's stayed on the whole time there. Now, he's been deplatformed pretty much on everything, and they've pulled his PayPal, they've pulled his, I think, monetization on YouTube, and if you see his Twitter account lately, I would say maybe 1 in 10 of his tweets actually go out before they get what word would we use for that, guys?
Memory holds.
Memory hold, exactly, Brian.
Yeah.
So Brian, let's I don't want to interrupt the flow of your channels. I would like to stick around here until Patrick gets on, and then we'll probably have a window of time that we can talk with him, and yeah, it'll be amazing. I've just sent him the link just now here, so he says he's going to link on as soon as he can. He just said that when he's on, he can't stay long pending on the situation, which is probably not one of the most popular destinations to travel at this time. And nice to meet you both. Thank you.
Yes, and Alex, feel free before and after Patrick comes on to kind of relay some of the things that you and Patrick have been talking about, things that have been going on. I've seen his videos. I saw his interview with Angelo, and I'll put the link to all of this in the video description below. And he was talking about how the people living there, they wanted to do what Crimea did. They want to join Russia. They want nothing to do with the regime in Kiev. It has nothing to do with self-determination by Ukrainians. It is Ukraine transformed into a captured state by the United States.
Yeah, I've been following this story for a while, and about a year and a half ago, it went into a really quiet mode. And Patrick was saying, is this a forgotten war? And I said, look at the carnage. No one's backed away from that front line since. When you blow up airports, when you cut off infrastructure, when you shut off the electricity to, I was trying to explain this to my mother last night. And I said, as a Canadian, we have a country that sometimes is divided. We have a French part of Canada in Quebec. Now, I said to my mom, imagine if there was skirmishes and Quebec decided, wait a minute, we don't really agree what's going on with the Western or Central Canada. And we would like some time to reflect or maybe, think about it. Well, imagine if the Canadian military was brought in, set up a front line on the borders of the provincial borders of Quebec, and all of a sudden said, wait a minute, let's shut your lights out.
Oh, we got Patrick.
There. Oh, great.
Sorry.
Fantastic, guys.
Hello, Patrick. Can you hear us?
Hello. Yes, I can. Can you see me?
We can see from your phone. Go ahead, Patrick. We're listening.
Okay. Hi, guys.
Hello.
So
Thank you,
right
Patrick.
now I'm in Donetsk, and as you know, there's a lot going on. Many cities in Ukraine have been reported to be taken by the Russian military in conjunction with the Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic military. And right now we're in Donetsk, where all the deputies of the Donetsk People's Republic are joining the mobilization right now to join the army and go. And we see some going into the recruitment office now. And these are all of the deputies of the Donetsk People's Republic. Hello?
Patrick, yes, please continue.
Please continue. Yeah, Patrick, you mentioned, are there any cities being taken? I've heard some report of Mariupol being taken, Russian army, landing into some cities. What are the reports? Are there any confirmed reports of maybe some cities being taken by Russian army?
Yeah, there's been many photos of different administration buildings with the Russian flag raised overhead, like Kharkov and other buildings around there. I just came from the Donetsk airport, and there's a lot of shelling going on in the distance. It seems like things are really hitting on the other side of the line.
We have also some reports of defections. Are those rumors of Ukrainian defections? They're laying down arms. Have you heard anything about defections, Ukrainian defections?
There's no reports of them actually laying down arms yet. I've been in the field, so I haven't heard all the reports. But as Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, said, he's giving the Ukrainian army a choice: lay down your weapons and you can go home to your family, or don't and don't.
Patrick, thank you for coming on the panel, and we're live on. We're on.
This seems to be the end of the Ukraine. This seems to be the end of the country of Ukraine.
And Patrick, can you elaborate on what that means and how people where you are, how they feel about this? Because I remember you talking about the aspirations of the people where you are in Eastern Ukraine, wanting to join Russia, not even wanting independence, but wanting to be a part of Russia. When you say the end of Ukraine, or how are you envisioning this unfolding?
Well, yesterday I thought when Russia came in, they were going to only come in to the borders of the original Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic. But now we see that it's much farther than that. The reason I thought it was only going to be the borders of the republics is because Russia, as you know, just recognized the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. And that's because the people that live in these republics are ethnically Russian. That's what the West doesn't understand. The West says this was a Russian occupation. It wasn't a Russian occupation. It was Russians living here. They're not ethnically Ukrainian people that live here. These are Russian people that speak Russian language that want to be part of Russia and voted to break away from Ukraine in 2014. Nancy Pelosi has said that Vladimir Putin is challenging democracy and putting in and attacking democracy. Well, what kind of democracy is the USA following if they didn't recognize the referendum where I was here? I saw the people vote to break away from Ukraine, and the Ukrainian government attacked them for it, and has been doing it for almost 8 years now.
Absolutely, Patrick. Well, one other question, and then Alex. Before 2014, I mean, have people talked about how they felt about Ukraine before 2014, before the overthrow of their elected government? How did they feel, and how has that feeling changed and led to all of this? I might have lost his connection.
Yeah,
You can see a bit of what's going on here. Sorry, I keep going back and forth here.
Okay, Patrick, were you able to hear our question?
Sorry, I missed it because there's some people walking through here. Because
Okay.
I mean, this is history in the making, so we need to really cover as much of this as possible.
Absolutely. Before 2014, how did people? Before 2014 in Eastern Ukraine, I mean, how did people feel about that government or about the arrangement that they lived under? Because we know how they felt about it after it changed. Were they okay with that? And isn't this the U.S. and its allies shooting themselves in the foot by triggering this cascading effect?
Before 2014, the people were still, of course, ethnically Russian and pro-Russian, but they were more happy with the existing government under Yanukovych. And then when Maidan happened and Yanukovych was removed, they felt like their voice was taken away. And the Ukraine they knew was dead because their government that they helped vote in through a democracy. Excuse me. Sorry, I just ran a little bit. The government they helped vote in was removed without their okay and their say. And then this 8-year war started after they voted to break away and made their own borders.
Alex?
Patrick, be safe there, my friend. And I just wanted to let you know that Patrick came on the show, and we did this quickly. Patrick, I just want to introduce you to Brian Berletic, okay, and to Angelo on the panel here today. These are two really cool guys that I've known for a while that are following this situation. And I want to say thank you for coming on to the show. And I'm going to pass you back over to Brian, because Brian would like to probably ask you a lot of questions. I talk to you a lot, but I think it's important that Brian, maybe also before you go, Patrick, where are you? Tell us where you are.
Right now I'm in Donetsk at a military base, a Donetsk People's Republic military base, where the deputies and other people, the leaders of the regions and lawmakers and things, everyone that's in every male that's in the DPR government is joining the military, and we are showing this right now. So let me. By the way, sorry. Nice to meet you, Brian. Sorry, it's a little hectic right now.
It's okay.
But let me turn the camera around and show you a little bit of what's going on here.
Sure.
Now, these are all deputies from the government of the Donetsk People's Republic, and they're getting ready to go to the front. Some of them are veterans who have been in the fight before in this war, and some of them are just lawmakers, deputies in the parliament.
And what is the mood like there? I saw when Russia recognized the two breakaway regions as independent, there was celebration. What is the mood like there now?
The mood here is happiness that the war is finally going to come to an end, is what they feel. I had a woman in the center of Donetsk not even 45 minutes ago come up crying and just thanking Vladimir Putin for going to be putting an end to the war, and saying how she feels like a real person now, because before she felt like Ukraine looked at them as not real people.
Yes, and I just want to maybe go into what's been going on in the lead up to this sort of policies and laws that Kiev has passed and targeted people in eastern Ukraine with, people who are ethnic Russians. Can you tell us a little bit about these laws and the impact it has had on the mentality of people who have risen up against the I call it client regime in Kiev?
Yeah. Well, I mean, after Maidan, after the new government came in, they started making laws to illegalize make the Russian language not an official language anymore, to make Russian holidays not official holidays anymore, like Victory Day, which would be like taking the Independence Day away from other countries. But yeah, it's really been a horrible time here for the people. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to break away, guys. I'm sorry I can't stay longer, but I'm looking forward to doing it again, okay?
Okay, thank you so much, Patrick. Please stay safe, and we look forward to you updating us when things calm down. Please, again, be safe, and thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Nice to meet you, and thanks, everybody. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Patrick.
See you guys later.
Okay,
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Well,
Okay,
Brian, I really appreciate you bringing Patrick on. I know he wants to get his voice out there.
Yes.
And as you know, there's certain platforms that don't want that voice out there. And, you know, you have a very good following. And I know it was kind of last second, last minute. And I was pushing to try to get Patrick on there. But in his situation, that is the new norm for him for the foreseeable future. I'll just give you a little bit more background on him. You know, he's been there for 8 years. He's pretty much seen it all. He has a terrific channel, and his wife, when they asked everybody to leave the Donetsk area, I think it was 4 or 5 days ago when they said to evacuate to Russia, his wife basically says, "I'm not leaving my man." And she says, I'm staying right here with you. And she knows how serious this is. And she said to him that she was not going to leave him in Donetsk without her there. So brave family, very brave family.
Yes, absolutely. And again, these are hardships that people should not even be suffering in the first place. This was all entirely avoidable. This entire conflict, the division and the destruction taking place in Ukraine over these last 8 years. Completely avoidable. And again, you have. I like to ask people, what do you think when you see Russia and the U.S. talking about Ukraine? I mean, what is that? Why isn't it Russia and Ukraine and everyone else on the sideline adding in? Why is it Russia and the U.S.? It's like the parent going to the principal and the kid is sitting next to the parent. Why isn't Ukraine speaking for itself? Why is the U.S. involved? It's the biggest smoking gun of who the real culprit is here. Alex, is there anything else you want to talk about? Information that Patrick has been relaying to you, or things that you have seen?
Well, here's the thing. We're in a time of what is credible news, and how I met Patrick is from trying to dig out that information on those areas. My father was in the Navy. I remember him bringing home a new TV back when the first starting of the Yugoslavian war was started. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he says, "There's going to be a war." And I said, "Really? Who? Where?" And he says, "NATO and the U.S. are going into Yugoslavia." And I said, "What for?" Well, I mean, whatever the reasons are for, but that's where we get into this situation. I've been watching the financial markets, and they've been the media has been really talking up how great these economies are massively recovering. Well, in the matter of 4 or 5 days, these financial markets have come off in the exact time of, the rhetoric ramping up. But could this be, I just want to float this out. Could this be, we get fake news in the regular mainstream media, but is there a deeper issue in these financial markets than what the governments are reporting on the numbers? I'm still grasping at the thought on how airlines are still profitable. I'm still wondering how, I'm seeing stories of people with hardship. We're saying, lost my job, can't get it back, lost my home. All the turmoil that's been going on in Canada as well, my own country. How much of this financial news is real now, and is this war timed at a point where they need to take the eyes off the financial markets, and maybe they'll just say, "Hey, war is there. This is what happens to the economy. Everybody's got to pay double the amount for the electricity, and suck it up, everybody." And that to me is really bothersome. And I'm trying to grasp. I think Angelo, you saw my correspondence a few weeks back when I was saying these financial markets look very strange going into the first 2 weeks of March. And I'm talking as an option trader. It's basically you buying insurance on what the market's going to do in March. And there was so much activity 2 weeks ago. So is this orchestrated?
Yeah, well, there's hyperinflation. With COVID, you had massive printing of dollars. So when you talking about hyperinflation, it means people have less purchasing power. People are getting poorer. Who got rich was the elites. So here, I think, of course, there are internal problems in the U.S. There's big divisions: the Democrats, the Republicans. This could be a diversion. I don't exclude that. It's probably related to that. You have internal problems. The economy is collapsing. Now what we're living here right now in Ukraine, this is an example of the shift of power. We are going from a unipolar world, the U.S. hegemony since World War II, and it's changing. And you have, what you mentioned, Yugoslavia. Russia back then, when there was a Yugoslavian war, which was actually, it was all financed by the U.S. It was planned by the U.S. There was lots of fake news about genocide. You had those countries.
Angelo, Angelo, that's when the first word of ethnic cleansing ever came out.
Exactly.
And let's not forget 78 days of aerial bombardment. And that was one of the most active times in Canadians, using our jets. Now, really, I've been to Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. Let's call it the former Yugoslavia. 78 days, really? They had to bombard that place that long? I mean, Brian, you know these numbers. They've probably hammered that place even more than Iraq. I mean, I think the figures are pretty astronomical. I mean, that was 78 days. And from thought, I believe that it is more. There was more bombing going on down there because they obliterated everything. They didn't stop at, hitting military sites. They hit all the bridges. They knocked them all out. And then they basically walked away. They walked away from it.
Well, back then, if you remember, it was just after the end of the USSR. Russia was extremely weak. Was completely the economy it collapsed, and Russia couldn't do much. And I think the trigger, the changing point was Syrian war. They toppled Libya. Libya is a failed state. They destroyed it completely. But at some point, they came in. Russia was invited to Syria, and this is the moment they said Russia started to say, "No, we are going to stop those war of aggression." And and this is when the sanctions started on Russia, and they started attacking Russia. And now Russia is saying again, "Stop." So this is a shifting time where those wars that the US is waging around the world. Now you have Russia and China that are saying stop. And I think Russia is much more aggressive. Russia is being attacked. This is Russian sovereignty, and this is national security. It's and this is the right thing to do. You've seen, like the expansion of NATO eastward since the 1990s. At some point, Russia has been saying for 8 years, no, we are not going to accept that. Just stop that. And I think this is the right timing. It's the right thing to do for Putin. And again, the Western media are talking about, occupation of Ukraine. Russia will not occupy Ukraine. Putin said clearly, it's about demilitarization of Ukraine and denazification, because at this moment you have the neo-Nazi, which is they're controlling everything. Even Zelensky doesn't have as much power as the neo-Nazi. The last word are those neo-Nazi, the Azov battalion, and the right sectors that have the last word in Ukraine right now.
And if I could jump in real quick, it was during that conflict that you're talking about, Alex, that there were Russian forces involved, and they were surrounded by NATO, and they withdrew because at that time Russia was weak. And we remember during every single conflict since then, NATO, American pundits, and politicians always referring back to that was their golden age of cleaning up after the fall of the Soviet Union. They went into Iraq. They remember General Wesley Clark talking about all these nations they were going to clean out before Russia could reemerge or China could rise. They ran out of time. We're watching what happens when you run out of time. Russia has reemerged, China has risen, and they, like Angelo said, they said this far and no further. They did it in Syria. Syria would be gone right now. And now they're doing it in Ukraine. They're saying this is unacceptable, and we're in dangerous times.
Let's just rewind a bit and how we got into this mess right now. Lukashenko was, it was Yanukovych, pardon me, Viktor Yanukovych, who was basically, kicked out, right? Can we say that? Coup d'etat, something along those lines. And I don't know if you guys remember, but I didn't see an election. I didn't see an election to, elect, the Petro Poroshenko. When did that happen? When did that vote happen? I don't know. It didn't. And the next thing you know, we wake up to, the Candyman running the country. So from there, it gets very interesting because he was not, you look at Viktor Yanukovych. Sorry, I get these guys mixed up sometimes. But Yanukovych, I believe he had 1 year to go, and this was all about, should he sign a customs agreement with Russia, or should he grow closer ties with the European Union? Guys, when you corner Russia like this, and you're on the doorsteps, and you try to keep going closer and closer and closer, they know the playbook. They've seen the playbook. How many countries have been toppled or destabilized? Brian, you know this. Angelo, you know this. So many countries. And you brought up Libya as well. I had, I've met a few Libyan friends that had told me, we're very confused why our country was destroyed. It was great. We had good universal health care. The education was great. And now it's in pieces.
I have some, sorry, Jason, I have something extremely important. I need to confirm this news, but this is okay, I'm going to read this. Territorial communities of the Beregovsky district. This is an area which is populated by Hungarian. You know, Hungarian is a minority in Ukraine. They actually want to hold a referendum of independence, a referendum of the accession of the territories of Ukraine populated mainly by Ukrainian to Hungary. This needs to be confirmed. You know, this is the first news, but that would mean, you know, the end of Ukraine. We might be assisting right now at the end of Ukraine. You know, there are different areas in Ukraine with the different minorities. So the western part is populated by people that have Hungary ethnicity. I'm going to share this with you on Telegram, Brian.
Okay. Sure.
This could be the beginning of the end of the country as it is right now. So you could imagine defections of other areas, and I think this is the end of Ukraine. It is the end of Ukraine. This is a historical moment we're living now.
I agree, Angelo. We are seeing some very strange things. We're seeing countries like Canada rise up. Okay, Canadians rose up. What did they get in return? They got their bank accounts seized for actually trying to do a nice protest. I mean, absolutely seized. If you made donations of anywhere from $50 to $100, you try to go in and you withdraw your money, not happening. There's actually been some, we'll call it bank runs in Canada to get money out, and they're throttling that too. So they go after the money first. They try to throttle that playbook. Did that yesterday in Russia, did it in Canada to its citizens. Then they go to try to ticket them, which equals sanction them, what they did in Russia. Okay. And this is a typical playbook. And they keep pushing down until the average individual, or i.e. Vladimir, has been sanctioned into the sun and has nothing to lose now. What has he got to lose now? When you've cut off his pipeline, pretty much, you've hit his banks. I mean, that used to be the old playbook, guys. There's other ways of currency now, to do that. But as a Canadian, I can't stand here anymore and tell you that my country allows freedom. My country allows this. It doesn't. I have witnessed our own media turn on the people for the first time I've ever seen it happen. And the people are trying to figure this out, because if you were following that protest in Canada, it was heavily publicized by vloggers that were out there vlogging about this situation. And they were gaining by the tens of thousands, guys. I mean, some of these channels started, and in no time, they were up to 500,000 viewers. Well, then they were told, well, if you're collecting money, we're going to seize it. So then GoFundMe gets seized. They go to another one. That gets seized. Then the government breaks into it, takes it, distributes it out to the tax authorities. So you're hitting people with the pocketbook, and you're pushing them against the wall. And this is what they've done, I think Vladimir Putin, when he saw those sanctions come down yesterday, and he saw that they're going after the pipeline, the second one, and now they're thinking about throttling the original one. I thought he says, you know what have I got to lose? Am I in outer space on this, guys, or am I within the realms of reality here?
Well, we're watching Western hypocrisy, and we're watching it, every little thing that it used to hide behind get taken away, and it's just out in the open, and it has nowhere left to hide. And like I said, I mean, you talk to people who are still going along with Western narratives, and these people are in an alternate universe. That they're trying to reconcile how the U.S., Canada, the UK, Australia, all of them, how they were lying about Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, doing this horrible thing to Yemen, and then trying to convince the world that this time in Ukraine, this is the time where they're actually telling the truth about everything and they're on the right side. Unreal. And just as you say, that look at how they treat their own people. And this is maybe new for people in Canada, but it's not new for people in the United States. This has been ongoing. I want to show some. Let's get everyone's take on this. Alex, go ahead if you have something else you want to throw in.
I think, I'm just going to add it that the issues with Canada, there's going to be people annoyed that they couldn't get to work and that. I mean, I'm glad that they still have a job, but they probably be kept up late. I'm reading that some people in the comments, or one guy in the comment section saying it wasn't a protest, or I don't know. He was saying that it kept people up all night. Understood, but when you have serious issues on the line and the government's not listening to you, and the police force says they're still going to hunt people down, and they're taking trucks away, and then they're threatening to bring child services in because somebody brought their kid to a protest. And when they're bringing the SPCA in to say that we're taking dogs away, I mean, come on, man. I mean, it's just, this is not the country that I knew. And we can't sit here anymore as Canadians and say, yeah, we got full control. We got our privacy. No, you don't. Look what happened. How does it? How does it? I spent 20 years, guys, in Europe, and living in Monaco, where banking and privacy is what builds the foundations of Monaco. Canadian banks said they had privacy. How on earth did the government and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police manage to seize thousands of accounts within hours? That's because that information is widely shared. Privacy out the window. Don't even want to hear about that anymore. That is there. It's right there. And people, this isn't fake news. I mean, it's people that, generally donated. And the government turns around and tells its people that, part of the Emergency Act, it's basically treating people that are trying to voice themselves as fundamentalists. Anyway, that's my rant. Sorry about that, Brian.
That's okay. I think the sickness within Western society is part of everything that's going on. This conflict in Ukraine is owed to the West's constant expansion, its exploitation, its abuse of people around the world. And as I always say, the American people, or in this case, the Canadian people, they're the empire's first victims at home. They are the ones being victimized, lied to, misled, controlled. Unfortunately, for people who think that just a protest by itself is going to change things, you have to think about what you're doing. You're asking horrible people to please stop being horrible. It's part of a wider strategy that needs to be pursued to change things. If you look at how Russia and China are changing the world, this notion of multipolarism, they're doing it by creating entirely different alternatives in terms of industry, institutions, infrastructure. And these are things that people back in the United States or in Canada or in Australia, people that want things to change, they need to take control of the basic necessities that people require day to day. They need to take control of that first. Asking horrible people to stop being horrible is not viable. Once you have control of that infrastructure and industry and business and economic ways of giving people a livelihood, then you could go out and protest. You have leverage against these people. You could make a case for what you want to see them do. And if they don't want to do it, you could just continue taking back your country from them in a very physical way. And I don't mean insurrection either. I mean just making sure you're in control of the things that you need day to day, your food, your water, a livelihood. These are all important. If you surrender this to a government that doesn't care about you, that this is what they're going to do. And in a lot of ways, this is exactly what's happened to Ukraine. They have surrendered their country, their industry, their infrastructure to the United States, the interests that make up and drive U.S. foreign policy, and look at where it's gotten them. I think even if they wanted to change things at this point, they can't. And I put out a video the other day about how Russia can't invade and occupy Ukraine. It already is occupied by U.S. interests. It's a captive state. All they can do is in a way liberate it or react to this occupation, this capture on their border. I want to go to this real quick. This is Crimea's water crisis is an impossible problem for Putin. This was 2021. This was because Ukraine dammed the river that Crimea was using to get all of their water. This was deliberately to cause, hit drinking water and irrigation for agriculture in Crimea. This is a direct attack on the people of Crimea, which, again, this is why they wanted out of Ukraine, because a government that's going to do this to you is not a government you want to live under. I have just heard, and don't know if it's true or not. Like I said, you have to wait and see. But because there's activity here being reported, Russian military operations potentially underway near where that dam is, that might be this impossible problem for Putin being solved right now. So we have to keep an eye on that. I want people to keep an eye on that. A lot of people don't even know that the U.S.-backed client regime in Ukraine cut the water off to Crimean civilians and agriculture. It's a crime.
Brian, I've got a question for you, Brian. I mean, I was listening to a recent podcast from a New Yorker talk radio host, and he was talking about, the Russians have a very, very advanced missile system, some of the most advanced in the world, and they haven't been under test, but it would be pretty hard in the regional to combat that. Do you think that's what's giving him, Vladimir, the confidence to go in there and feel that the West is not going to strike back? Because it doesn't matter if one rocket comes out of anywhere in Europe, it's game on, and everybody is exposed, from Poland to Romania to you name it. So, is Europe actually ready to start putting missiles in the air? Or are they just going to bring them into Ukraine and that country is just going to get obliterated? What's your take on that?
It's hard to tell. Russia had its most advanced or some of its most advanced air defense systems deployed to Syria, but they never used them. They were using older generation equipment. And a lot of people wondered, why aren't they doing that? Because once you use that, once the enemy gets to study the characteristics of the system, they can start figuring out ways to circumvent it or neutralize it. And so by holding off, by being patient in Syria, it might have paid off, because this situation in Ukraine is even more critical than Syria, which Syria was already extremely critical. So it remains to be seen. That's something there's no way to know until, they have advanced anti-aircraft. Even the older generation systems keep Israeli and American air assets at arm's length, because they don't want to get in there too close too often, because they're afraid.
So who's our spokesman for Europe then? Who's going to take the mic and respond to this today? The Chancellor?
No, but there's no united. Yeah. Europe is not united there. I think we need to separate. The EU, when it's talking, the EU talking, and then you have foreign policy is in the hand of president. That is the only thing that actually they have. The power they have, and this is why you have different voices like Macron and Scholz, and then you have EU taking independently decisions. They're working separately. So you have frictions between sovereignty of countries and the EU. I just want to add one thing. What I'm seeing through the reports, the breaking news is that the armed force, the air force in Ukraine has been completely controlled by Russia. Annihilated. So we are. Putin is actually asking right now for complete surrender. Those are the news. I just want to add one more thing. There's lots of news coming out right now, and we need to be careful. There's lots of fake news, because it's wartime, they're coming from both sides. So, usually, on this channel, we make lots of research. If we're saying something and it is not right, like I said just before, Hungarian that wants to vote for referendum, we need to be extremely careful. In the next 2 to 3 days, there's going to be lots of fake news, and we need to double, triple check. So whatever we say, people need to be, just pay attention. It's wartime. Fake news are coming from both sides. It's really hard for us to really understand what is going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Brian. Pretty amazing that they weren't prepared for cyber warfare. That always baffles me when these countries that they mentioned 2 days ago, they must have known already 2 days ago that something was going on. I'm surprised the telecom grid is still up there. Really, I am.
Can I say something? Jason, just yesterday, Zelensky asked, "Can I talk to you, Putin?" And I think probably he knew what was going on, and that's too late. You had 8 years. There were some very clear Minsk agreement and things to do through this Minsk agreement. Ukraine never respected that. Never. You know, they're saying these days, they're saying, well, Russia, by giving, you know, accepting the autonomy of those regions, recognizing those regions as being independent, has broken the Minsk agreement. That's not true. The Minsk agreement has not been respected for 8 years. It was very clear. You know, for 8 years, Donbass has been shelled. You know, they haven't respected the right of the minorities. So you know, who broke the Minsk agreement were Ukrainians.
And I can echo that, you know, with what Patrick would always say to me. I've been in touch with him, you know, nonstop for 5-6 years, and I said, "How's it going?" And he said, "Well, we have a, you know, we'll call it a ceasefire." And I said, "Well, that's great news." He says, "But nobody respects it. They don't respect it. 2 days later, shelling, and then there's denial." Well, I mean, you go to some of these buildings here, it's all over his channel, and I mean, some of the stuff lately. You know, I said to him, you know, "Patrick, you're posting some pretty graphic stuff." And he says, "If I don't get this message out this time and risk my life doing it, I may never get that message out." And what you're seeing with him and his channel, and guys, I look forward to him coming onto your channel more, Brian, because he doesn't really trust much media, because in the early days, he was naive when he first went in there and tried to tell the story, and they stitched him right up. So to get him on shows, he's like, "Where am I going, Alex? Who am I talking to? Are you sure? Are we clear? Yes, we're clear, Patrick. Let's go." I can see that he's okay. You know, can he ever go to Ukraine? Absolutely not. He's not allowed there anymore because he's a guy that is putting out information. But, you know, his latest videos, I could see that, you know, things were getting very, very serious. And when he starts to put out videos like that, he's thinking end of days, that guy. I'm serious. You know, this is real journalism. This is real guys that, you know, trust me, he'll put on a hat and a bulletproof vest, and he'll get into the bunkers on the front line. How do I know that? He's did it before. He stood there meters away while the Donetsk People's Republic's airport got obliterated, you know? And that's, hearing that, I could never really understand at the start. You know, they're blowing up all the infrastructure. They're cutting off the bank machines. They're cutting off the pensioners. This is your own country bombing your own people. I mean, what's wrong with you guys?
Yeah,
Jason, I can relate to that, and I think Brian can relate to that too. Why did we come? You know, we had a normal life. Brian, myself, we had a normal life, and what happens is that myself in Hong Kong, I saw what was going on, and I saw all the fake news, and at some point, you know, I had to come out. The same for Brian. You know, they were trying to do like a color revolution. I mean, plenty of U.S. money being poured into Thailand just to do a color revolution. And at some point, you know, you see that, and it's affecting you. At some point, you're like, you know what, I need to come out and speak out. I mean, and we are regular citizens, you know, and we just wish we didn't have to do that. And I can relate to what Patrick is going through. It's in the middle of this chaos, and you have all the Western media that are telling lies over and over. And it's like, he's on the ground. He has legitimate voice to talk about what is happening on the ground. And they're being shelled. It's like 5 kilometers from the airport. And there's heavy shelling. It's been 8 years. You know, for 8 years, you have Donbass region, 2 million people. Most of them have been living in basements. Talk about human rights. And we're talking about Ukrainians, you know, shelling their own citizens. And they don't want to talk to them. You know, Ukrainians don't want to talk to people from Donbass. They're talking about them. They're calling them, you know, traitors, terrorists. I mean, what are you expecting? And again, one more thing is that, you know, 8 years ago, people from Donbass, they didn't want to have independence. What they wanted is they wanted to join the Russian Federation. And Putin said, no, I mean, I can't accept that. You know, so he's been holding on, and he doesn't want to annex those territories. They're talking about, Putin wanting to have the new greater Russia. It's not true. I mean, look at the land of Russia. Does it need more land? It doesn't need more land. It doesn't need more land. It's just that you have ethnic Russians there in Donbass, and they want to make sure that's not going to happen a genocide next door. It's those, they care about those people. If they didn't care about those people, do you think they would accept hundreds of thousands of refugees these days? Every refugee, they take care of them. They're giving them, each of them, 10,000 rubles. They're giving them passports. If you need, we give you a Russian passport. What is the US doing to Ukraine? US, they all left the embassy. So, and you call them your allies? No, you've been using Ukraine as a pawn to fight against Russia.
Absolutely. I just want to throw in real quick, because I was going to say myself and Angelo, we got into this out of necessity because we were watching it happen with our own eyes. We watched the BBC seeing the exact same things we saw with our own eyes, and then we watched them go back to their newsroom and then lie blatantly, deliberately, to continue to expand, to escalate the crisis, to cause harm to human beings that we live side by side with, friends and family, and just people in our communities. And this is what Patrick is faced with. He is faced with trying to tell a story about a region under siege for 8 years that has been completely ignored by the Western media, completely lied about. And he is risking his life. People cannot grasp this unless sometimes unless they experience it for themselves. He is taking huge risks for himself and his family. He's a husband. He is a father of 2 children. I have 2 children. I know what it would feel like to put your family in danger, to paint a target on you, to get the truth out, because the Western media is not just suppressing it, but deliberately manipulating it in a way that endangers your life, the life of people around you, your community, the area you live in. And like in Angelo's case in Hong Kong, or here in Thailand, the well-being of an entire nation. We watch what the US has done. Just in my time following this since the turn of the century, how many nations has it destroyed? How many nations has it helped? 0. Ukraine will not be any different. So people, I will put the links to Patrick's work in the video description. Please support him in any way you can.
Just to, how I met Patrick is I met Patrick from that exact reason. I was always interested in what was going on in that region. And I kept digging, and all arrows were pointing the Western media. Well, lo and behold, here's this Patrick Lancaster guy with a YouTube channel. And I thought, no commercials coming on his videos. Why? He's demonetized. How can I send him GoFundMe? Can't. So I was one of the sizable donators of his channel at an early stage. And I continued to support his channel financially for, at least, I would say 3 to 4 months. And I decided, this is a good guy. I'm going to go out there and going to fly down to meet him. So we met each other and we spent some time. And this guy, I mean, he is not, he's not an influencer. He's not somebody that's out there, doing product placements. This guy is down there, as you say, Brian, absolutely risking his life, putting everything on the line. Now, if you watch the mainstream media, and I know I don't want to continue to harp on the mainstream media, but when they report, or if they're going to report on Luhansk or Donetsk, and Angelo, welcome back. When the mainstream media is going to report on the Donetsk and Luhansk area, they're going to be doing it from 1,000 or 2,000 kilometers away. Just like when there's an issue in Palestine, they'll be sitting in Dubai. Welcome to the program, everybody. There's shelling going on in Palestine. We're live here from Dubai. They're not on the front line. And I'm telling your audience today, this is a guy that has a camcorder that's probably about 5 years old. He doesn't buy a new phone because it usually gets broken because he's diving for cover half the time. He just went on just went live on this, podcast, or pardon me, your live stream, Brian. And look what was in behind him. Military getting ready to go. And at any moment's time, he is so passionate about getting this message out. That's what I like about guys like Patrick. He's a true embedded, we'll call him a crowd-funded journalist. I think his only donation available left, it's in the About Us area, but his only donation tab left is one of the last companies that will allow him to open up and take donations, because everybody else has pretty much shut him down or shut him off. And to me, that's just sorry. That's what got me into, getting on YouTube. I'm covering mostly stuff in China, but boy, oh boy, we got a great group of people in a great circle of content creators. I'll call us that if I can. That, you saw my tweets this morning, or my messages this morning, Angelo. I was extremely worried about this guy, and I still am, because he may end up, not on the right side of history here in the next few days. He's in a very volatile situation.
Absolutely. It's extremely dangerous. Modern warfare, things can change very quickly. There's no way to be certain what will happen. You just have to wait and see. This is one of the things, I mean, it's killing you to know what will happen, especially if you're directly invested in it, or you have people there that but also it drives us crazy, because we know what happens in Ukraine is going to have a direct impact on U.S. and this confrontation that it's engineering with China and all of the nations caught in between that confrontation. So this is why it's so important to stand up for other people, because eventually it's going to be your turn. It really doesn't matter where in the world you are. It's eventually going to end up being your turn. I covered the Arab Spring in 2011 because I knew it had calmed down from 2010 here, but it was going to come back. And of course it did. And so you put in the time to help other people stand up and have their voice heard. It will pay off in the end, because eventually everyone will start to see through this and stand up against it. And this is so important. So it is important to raise awareness for Patrick's work. I know myself what they have done to try to silence me. And because of my associations with Russian media or whatever they're accusing me of, they do this to everybody. It's terrible. Everyone has to stick together and fight back.
Well, Brian, and I can understand that Patrick has told me the amount of threats in his life, and I can think just about everybody on this panel has had that. I'm almost saying with, the amount of death threats that I've had over the last 10 years, it's almost like somebody has a template on the internet for them, because all the letters sound very familiar. I mean, somebody just posted on one of the questions that why doesn't Patrick have a press accreditation, a vest? He doesn't need one. He's the only guy. And he's the only guy down there. He does wear a bulletproof vest when possible, and some gear, but this is as raw as it gets. And I have a feeling him coming on this show is a good thing, because he needs people. He needs a platform. And Brian, and Angelo, sorry we were doing it so fast. I didn't mean to push into the channel, but these are people that Patrick needs to get his message out, because you never know, his channel might get shut down here in the next few weeks. Because one thing that we can ask, maybe you guys have asked this, but Brian, you have quite a few people on this live stream. What are the people seeing in their country as the news flow right now? I'd be very curious to see what our viewers are viewing on their televisions. Maybe people can comment. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've asked that question.
That's a good question. So in the comment section, just say where you are and how the media is reporting this. I'm in Thailand. I'm watching two different stories. I'm watching the alternative media, I guess you could call it, here in Thailand. The people who are aware of U.S. meddling here in Thailand see right through what's going on in Ukraine. They went to the Russian embassy and interviewed the Russian ambassador to Thailand to get his take, which I thought that was very unique. I haven't seen anyone else do that. But then you have a very significant Western influenced media here. who is just regurgitating whatever the West says. Oh, a Russian invasion, Russian aggression, and the people who are buying into the U.S.-backed anti-government protests here in Thailand, they're all for anything that is U.S.-backed, and so it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Angelo?
Well, I live normally. I mean, I've been living in China for 27 years now, and I'm actually these days I'm in Switzerland. But when I look at the media in Switzerland, it's all, I mean, they copy paste. I mean, all those media don't have the means to have journalists on the ground. You just copy paste what is coming from the mainstream media, which are pro-NATO media. So it's only one version of the story. I just want to add one thing. I mean, again, we've said it many times. We're not pro-Russia, pro-China. I mean, we just against war. We want peace, but we want the truth to come out. We have no reason. What other reason? I mean, for us just to be pro-Russian. I mean, we're not even paid. I mean, we're taking. This is all time that I could be doing something else. No, there's truth to be told. Who's the aggressor? We want to expose the aggression. This is a Western aggression. This is neo-colonialism. This higher view. This is a proxy war. It's a U.S. hegemony. It's vanishing. This economy is collapsing, slowly collapsing. There's a decline. The shift of gravity of the economy is shifting towards Eurasia. What is happening right now in Ukraine is very simple. They want Ukraine to decouple from Russia. They want Europe to decouple from Russia. Because why? Because slowly the US is collapsing. It's collapsing. It was the hegemonic, it's 4% of the population that wants to control the rest of the world. And no, you know what? We are entering a critical time right now. We are entering into a new era of multipolar world, meaning that the global south finally, after hundreds of years of imperialism, will have a voice. This is what is happening. And you know what? Ukraine is a pawn and is a victim in this. And I'm sad for the shelling in Ukraine, but it's really important for people to really understand what is behind this. It's much bigger. It's a change. The world is changing, and we enter into multipolar world. And this is a proxy war right here. It's a proxy war.
I heard a line the other day, Angelo, that somebody said, the credit card is maxed, and the card holder has to get used to a lower standard of living.
Well, exactly. The high standard of living. It's the goal was already the goal. French president in the 70s, he was talking about the privilege of being the country that is actually printing the global currency. When you have that privilege, you have a whole population in the US which is living as a high standard of living, but at which expense? It's at the expense of the world that is actually needs to use US dollar. It's been imposed upon the world. So now when they need money, they're just printing that. And this project is a project of containing the global south. It means you don't want them to be industrialized. You don't want them to grow, to have prosperity. So your prosperity is at the expense of the rest of the world. But you can't, it's 4% of the world. If you really cherish human rights and democracy, well, democracy needs to be under the UN and multipolar world, that you have all the world that has access to the same resources, the same rights. Why are you hijacking all those democracies around the world? You accept only the democracies that go into your globalist agenda. If it's not, you do a coup. And then you support dictatorship. You support the Saudi Arabia. It's full of hypocrisy. It's a different, neocolonialism is very different. Now the weapons are different, and it's much like they're using soft power. It's like we are exporting human rights and democracy. It's not. Why don't you solve the problem at home? Bring democracy back to the US. It's a joke. Why would you call it democracy when it's ruled by the 1%?
I just want to kind of jump in real quick. Ukraine and also Taiwan I mean, we hear accusations that Russia is invading and occupying Ukraine. As I've said many times, it is an occupation already by the U.S. It's just by other means, but it is still an occupation. It is a regime in power that does not represent the interests of the people. Even if you can convince the people that those are their best interests, it's so clear that it's not their best interests. And so this is what is going on now. We're past the 2-hour mark. I maybe shift this in a little bit of a different direction. What happens in Ukraine is most certainly going to help define how the Taiwan question unfolds and the U.S. confrontation with China now, because depending on how this goes, we just saw that all of the attention, all of the hysteria was surrounding Taiwan and the imminent invasion by China of Taiwan. And then everything shifted real quick to Ukraine. Once this is resolved, whichever direction it goes, this is going to dictate a lot about how this whole conflict that the U.S. is engineering with China over Taiwan is going to unfold. What is everyone's thoughts on this? Maybe start with Alex and then Angelo.
Yeah, I mean, good points all around. It's just that, is this going to continue to escalate? I mean, the genie's out of the bottle here. How much more? I mean, the boy cried wolf. I mean, the Americans have said, okay, we're going to sanction this, sanction that. Okay, thank you. They've done it thousands of times. Okay. I think Russia was sanctioned from the last sanctions of the last sanctions. So, all right, now you've sanctioned them. Bombs have headed into the air. And what's the next move? That's what I'm wondering, where this escalates. Financial markets, steady down, not looking great. And they're going to look for some direction. And I think this has got a lot to do with how much cash has been pumped into these systems here. And do they keep this rhetoric up for weeks, days? I mean, wow, I got to tell you, I didn't expect that move this morning from Vladimir, but it hasn't really been hit back with a big response. And that's, the silence is deafening. I mean, it's very strange. You would have thought there would be an immediate, like, hey, if you do this, we're going to do that. Look out. And he had, I don't know, 90 leaders around the world that wanted to spank him for at least doing a couple of the things that he's been doing over the last couple of weeks. Well, he's done a pretty bold move here, don't you think, guys? I mean, this is, let's remember Crimea. I mean, I remember that. I remember all the emergency meetings. Oh, yeah, if there's a red line, you go over that line, well, they did. And they walked in there and, okay, nothing happened. So are we going to see the same here, or is there another move that you guys are anticipating?
Well, you see, it's interesting to see that whenever there is the U.S. in, especially locally, that meddles, actually it takes sides and is actually creating divisions. The Minsk agreement happened. You know why? Because the U.S. was not in the Minsk agreement. It was what they call the Normandy format. So Germany, France, Ukraine, and Russia, they sat down, and it was a local. It's local. It's not, the U.S. is far away, and then they managed to broker a deal. Well, it's the same. If it was between Taiwan and China, they would sit down and find a solution, and they would reunite. People forget that not long ago, in 2015, Ma Ying-jeou, the president of Taiwan, he actually met with Xi Jinping, and they were actually talking about, a long-term plan of reunification. Now what happens that the U.S. has been backing the DPP of Taiwan. It's been saying, well, why don't you push for independence, so on, like just the same as they've been pushing with Zelensky, say, we got you back. And they're doing the same with Taiwan. We got you back. We're going to sell you weapons. We are going to train. You have the training. I mean, U.S. Army is training local army in Taiwan. So you're pushing for war. And this is this whole thing about divide and control. You're siding with Taiwan, with the DPP, and saying, well, we got you back. Well, it's history repeating itself. I just want to go back. Remember World War II. They say to Poland, we got you back. England say to Poland, we have your back. Stay strong in front of Hitler. You know what happened? Poland ended up being split between the USSR and Germany. You know, Poland was just used as a pawn. And this is what the US is doing. It's just backing one side and saying, we got your back. And you know what? Where's the US now with Ukraine? They used it. You know, it's like, I mean, the expression, you know, use and discard like a used condom. That's what they're doing. It's sad. I feel sad for Ukrainians. But you know what? You've been used. You got to admit that.
That's point blank. I hate to say it. But yeah, you have. I think, you know, many militaries that get dragged into this NATO. I mean, you know, look at some of these countries, you know, Boris is now down there saying, yeah, we're going to give this and we're going to support. I mean, there are countries in Europe that are keeping very quiet right now. The Baltics are very quiet at the moment. And they don't have many friends in Asia right now because what they've identified one of their offices in Lithuania, they're very quiet. And I think they should be very quiet during this phase because mistakes can happen. And that is kind of what I felt. You know, I was chatting with my wife a couple nights ago and I said, it's going to happen. It's imminent. It's going to happen. They're just poking and poking and poking him. And you know what? I don't. Do you guys really think they expected him to do this today?
They should have. They should have, because this is a repeat of 2008 when they provoked Russia over Georgia. And they had Georgia firing the first shots. They lied about it at the time. It turns out that was Georgia provoking that. They did the exact same thing to Georgia. They gave them U.S. weapons. They trained them, and they just sent them right into a meat grinder. And back then, the Russian military wasn't anywhere near as reformed and organized as it is now, and now battle hardened their experiences in Syria. And this is the thing. Everyone was warning everyone after Hong Kong. Well, what did the U.S. do with all of these Hong Kong agitators that they had been funding and backing and making all of these promises to? All of these Americans and British were living in Hong Kong who, you know, they thought they were like a viceroy there, and they all had to run and hide in Taiwan. What do you think is going to happen to everyone else playing that game? Do you think that Hong Kong was just an anomaly and the U.S. otherwise is honorable and backs up all of these people? No, this is what they do to everyone. So they did it to Hong Kong. Now they did it to Ukraine. Clearly, Ukraine is done. No matter how this shakes out, they're done. And now you have Taiwan left, they're the last one. So 2 out of 3. How does Taiwan think that this is all going to go down? I mean, they should start really thinking there is a path where they could get back on it to the status quo. Nothing would make Beijing happier, and they could go down the road like that, or they can continue on this dead end. It's a cliff. It's a cliff, and it's an abyss. They're going to fall over it if they don't wake up.
Yeah, that's interesting, Brian. You know, I used to, when I'm reading Western media, I go right for the comments area to kind of see what the people are saying. And I have really seen a massive shift in the last 3 to 4 months here, where people are just tired of it. They're not believing it anymore. These channels, like your channel, has massively exploded over the last few months, and congratulations for that. Your audience is tuned in, and they're educated. And they're understanding that, you know, we're not going to get lied. We don't want to be lied to anymore. And, you know, content creators are kind of the last hope of trying to get information out there. The Patrick Lancasters of the world. I mean, every country needs one of those types of guys down there to tell the story, because if not, then where do we go? And, you know, I'm really happy that, you know, you brought me on again, and I thank you very much for that. But having this discussion, I've tried to have this discussion with some other people back in my home in Canada, and they think I'm, you know, from another planet sometimes when I say the things. Even living in China, they're like, we'll be careful when we're talking to you over the phone. I'm like, why is the Trudeau government listening? You know, like, right? So I mean, it's for us being in here, and Brian in Thailand. You know, I saw that. I lived in Thailand for 7 years. I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, it's extraordinary, and how some of that stuff is funded there. Let me tell you how bad it got in Thailand, and maybe you can vouch for me on this story. I lived in quite a decent condominium tower in the city there, and I noticed so many foreigners in my building, so many, you know, single foreigners, you know, NGOs managing to have the biggest apartments, the most expensive apartments. We're talking 3, 4, 5 grand for an apartment in Thailand for rent. And I had them over one night, and a few of them. It was a New Year's party, and it didn't. At first, I thought I was being a nice guy, and I said, "Oh, where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from, you know, this organization." "Oh, cool." And then somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, I'm from UNICEF." And I was sitting there with a guy that I had quite a few conversations with, who, you know, at the time didn't trust the mainstream media. So I was sitting there chatting with this girl, and she said, "Oh, UNICEF." And I said, "Yeah, I remember collecting the money in those little orange boxes when you were a kid. You guys know what I'm talking about? UNICEF would give kids, we'd go around, collect money, give it to UNICEF." She says to me at a New Year's party, "Thank you for the first class ticket."
Yeah, exactly.
And boy, oh boy, did that. I have never seen my friend lose his cornflakes so bad, but he just went nuts, and he just says, you know, "Get out of the party," kind of. And it said to me, wait a minute, I'm in a building of hundreds of NGOs. What on earth are all these NGOs doing in Thailand, in Bangkok, in a 5-star tower, drinking champagne in a $5,000 apartment for one person? What is going on here? And I just, I went down into the elevator the next day, and I just sat in that lobby, and I just thought, who are these people? Where are they coming from? And you would go out, and you know, Angelo, I don't know if you know this, but I mean, in Bangkok, you know, at the time when things were flowing pretty good, you would go out, and you'd sit down and have dinner. Somebody from another NGO, "Oh, this is great. It's pretty good. You know, I'm making 10, 15 grand expenses covered." NGO, you're looking me in the face and you're making 15K and you're sitting in Thailand in a 5-bedroom condo apartment. Not happening. And that's the problem here.
Alex, you know what I look at? I look at the size, every country, the size of the US embassy. It tells you how much meddling there is. You
look
know,
at Romania's. Look at Romania's.
I mean, look at Hong Kong. Hong Kong, I'm talking about massive, you know, same as in Thailand. I mean, the size of the embassy, because it's a center for meddling for the whole region. I just want to add one thing. You know, this related to Ukraine. This is breaking news, and I trust this media. The media is truthful. They're just saying that they are reopening the canal of Crimea. That canal is the water. Remember the water, 8 years ago, Ukraine, they shut down the water to Crimea. I mean, this is it's a violation of human rights, you know, shutting down the whole water of Crimea. Well, the governor of Crimea just announced that they are going to reopen this canal. So now, from now on, the water that was actually going from Ukraine to Crimea, the water is going to go through. You know, this is breaking news, and it's telling you about, you know, the big changes by the minutes. There's so much happening right now in Ukraine.
Yep. That's what I was talking about. Go ahead, Alex.
I'm just, guys, I'm just wondering here. I mean, Europe's waking up. Are they waiting for the lead from 9 a.m. Washington?
Yeah, I know.
It's going to be hard to tell how they respond. But just like you said, Alex, and this is the question that needs to be answered. How is this going to unfold? Are they going to escalate? Are they going to wage some kind of ridiculous war? And again, remember, we're talking about formations of literal Nazis in Ukraine that even Time Magazine has done video reports on. What are you going to risk to save them? And I was having arguments with people yesterday, and they were saying, how come Russia hasn't been kicked out of the UN Security Council? And I said, I mean, the US has repeatedly carried out the worst crimes against humanity of the 21st century over and over and over again, and they have not been kicked out. Why would Russia be kicked out for stopping ethnic Russians from being killed by literal Nazis in eastern Ukraine? It makes no sense. And this is the level of insanity that Western political discourse has reached, and it's very unpredictable. I saw someone when we first started this show, like 2.5 hours ago, someone was saying that a rabid empire is extremely dangerous, and that is the bottom line here. It could not be more dangerous. A desperate, dying, rabid empire is extremely dangerous. Angelo.
Well, the only fact that the U.S. is going to go from number one to number two in terms of economic superpower. I mean, imagine you have a generation of Americans, they'd be brought up to, this sense of superiority. We are the best. I mean, how much brainwashing there is, it's always about, coming from all perspective, using all lenses. You know what? I want to tell people in the West that, because all of us here, we've been living in other countries, in other continents for 2 decades, all of us. You need to start to look with different lenses. The lenses we have are a complete distortion of the vision of our world. So we want to impose on other countries the way we see the world. And the way we see the world, because, there's the bias, Western bias, is like, we are the best, and we are going to teach you how you are going to have, what is going to be your political system, your economical system, and so on. You know what? Those times are over. The Western hegemony is historically, it's an anomaly. It lasted 150 years. You know what? It's shifting back to where it was for 2000s of years, and it was Eurasia, it was India, China, and there's a new, and we need to stop containing the global South, this imperialistic, and it's extremely racist. Ultimately, it's extremely racist, because we think that the white guy has the last word, and we are going to go to China and teach Chinese how they should manage there in China using my value. Those are distortion. The West needs to start with to use different lenses. You cannot solve a problem that it's the mind itself that has created. If you use the same mind that has created the problem, it's going to repeat itself. Keep on doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Yeah, another thing to add to that, Angelo, where you're saying that people need to look through different lenses. A strange thing happened to me in 1996, and that was called the internet. And when I turned on the internet for the first time, I went right for countries that, I've always been kind of a geography freak of loving to see how countries were formed. And I started to read stuff on the internet that wasn't available in my library. And after that 72-hour first binge of the internet, I went down to my local library, because remember, everybody, that was the only way to get information back then. And I asked the librarian, well, I would like, give me some history books from East Germany, and let's just continue to go further in. Sorry, sir, we don't have that in the Dewey Decimal System. It's not in our library. And many years later, I called my sister, and she was the head of one of the school boards in Canada. And I said, do me a favor. Can you tell me when, the Canadian libraries started to get books in their libraries on history, on certain areas of the world, the USSR and stuff like that. And lo and behold, it was 1997. A lot of the books started to come into circulation for the first time. Now, is that a nation, or are those nations that really want to control history? It's something to think about, because the internet has opened up and allowed us to get a message out. Now, of course, we got to be careful on what is fake news. But boy, is it sure nice to be able to get a guy on a mobile phone in the middle of a war zone on a show on the internet. bravo, guys. Well done. I'm serious. Like, there and you're still going to get people that see Patrick Lancaster in Donetsk that'll say fake news, not happening.
Yeah, no, or that guy is a traitor. So and he's on the other side, so I don't believe anything he's saying, because I've had that conversation with so many people. I will show them Victoria Nuland openly admitting that the U.S. pumped $5 billion into Ukraine's political system, blatant interference and essentially co-opting Ukraine's political institutions. And I will show people her uttering these words out of her own mouth, and people will say, you're a Russian agent. That doesn't matter. Somebody's funding is only of consequence if you can prove that they're lying. If they're telling the truth, you have to deal with that. You can't say, well, you're funded by so and so. So it doesn't matter. It does matter. It's a fact. You can't change a fact by deflecting, and these are called logical fallacies for a reason, because it's completely illogical. And again, that's where Western political discourse is. It's in the realm of the illogical. It makes no sense. It's descending into increasingly childish levels that you wouldn't expect to see. And it's sad, because these are adults talking like this, acting like this, buying into these things. Angelo, it looks like you've got something to say.
Oh, well, I think you've mentioned quite a few times. You know this Sun Tzu, The Art of War, know thyself and know thy your enemy. Well, this is the problem of the West. You know, China and Russia, I mean, they've been studying their history and they've been studying the West. You know, the problem of the West is self-centered, and it doesn't know anything about the history of Russia, the history of China. You know, if you don't know your enemy, how can you? I mean, once you start knowing who you have in front of you, maybe you might start actually compromising, because you need to understand them, and that's the weakness of the West. It's about this ignorance. I mean, ignorance will kill the West. You know, they say there are 4 levels of awareness. The first level is you don't know that you don't know. And this is the level of the West. You know, and the second level is that you know that you don't know. But they don't even at the second level. They don't know that they don't know. I mean, that's the foundation. Start to learn from your enemy. And the more you learn about your enemy, with time you just realize, well, it's not my enemy. You know why? Because the aspiration of Chinese and Russian, what are they? It's about prosperity. What average people want is put food on the table, have education, have universal healthcare. And you realize that the more you know the other people, the more you realize that they're like you and I. What the West wants to do is to demonize the global South, to demonize Putin, to demonize Chinese, and say, well, those are the bad guys and we are the good guys. And that's ignorance. And I think what is extremely important from our side is to be the bridge. To be the bridge. You know, we at least we are more legitimate to talk about this. We've been living in Asia for 2 decades, each one of us. We have this responsibility to say, well, you know what? They are not evil. They are like you and I. And we need to be careful. You know, this polarizing is not black and white. It's not black and white.
Absolutely. And they know, and the people telling these lies know that, and they know exactly what path they're leading everyone down by trying to polarize people, by trying to simplify China into inhuman, almost like insects that we have to go out and fight. It's horrible. We've been down this road in human history so many times. It only leads to tragedy, and the people need to wake up from it. Another thing that might be worth pointing out is that the West has had this mentality of might makes right, and they have created a world order predicated on this notion. And now that they're not really the mightiest anymore, they're kind of having a meltdown. And even ordinary people are noticing the hypocrisy of, like, didn't you invade Iraq and Syria and Libya and Afghanistan? Like, how are you lecturing? Right? I mean, even if Russia is totally wrong about this, they're only as wrong as you have been for the last 20 years. Like, I mean, what are you talking about? And then when you peel back the layers, you realize Russia is reacting. This isn't make up a bunch of lies and then go into a country for no reason. They have been provoked. They have been given almost no other choice but to do this because we've shown NATO encroaching on them. We've shown people just come out and openly say, Russia is next. We're going to flip the government of Ukraine, change their political system, and then we're going to do reforms in Moscow. I mean, what does that mean? What if Russia and China were talking about Western countries like that? They would lose their minds. They would be beside themselves in rage. And yet this is what they're openly doing to other countries. And a lot of people watching, even when they realize that that's what's happening, they don't see anything wrong with it. So it's racist imperialism in the year 2022.
You know, I'm also thinking that, you know, I'm curious what Western reporters have stayed in Ukraine to give us live man on the street reports during this so-called skirmish, or did they run to the airport as quickly as possible and get a humanitarian flight out? Or maybe they visited one of the largest American embassies I've ever seen in one of the neighboring countries of Romania. I don't know if you've ever been and seen that Romanian embassy, but wow, a lot of people really need visas that bad in a country that now is part of the European Union. That thing is the size of, well, you know, as Angelo was saying, the one in Thailand is not an embassy; it's blocks. Yeah. You could put half of Monaco in that place. I mean, it's so bloody big. So you know, that's why I'm thinking, you know, they were really pushing a lot of their citizens to actually go near the border of Poland. So that may be the nucleus point where they feel that that's the safest they are, and that might be where all this, we'll call it back to force organization, is going on. Because, I mean, they were quick to tell everybody to get the hell out of Kiev, weren't they?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just curious if anybody in the chat room has actually seen a Western reporter stand on the ground live in Kiev instead of a camera propped up on a building with a live stream. I'd be curious to see that, and if that reporter is going to stay in that area.
We've got this guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, Paul Mason. I just found him yesterday. He's just he's in another dimension. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Maybe you could tell us a little about him, because I know next to nothing about him.
What was his latest tweet? What's he going on about?
Let's see.
This guy can talk, though. This guy can talk.
You just give us a little background about this guy, and I'll look for the real. He really laid out.
I was promoting him about 4 days ago, so I'm as green as you, you know. But I mean, it's worth to see some of these people. I mean, eccentric is an understatement, you know. But he's British, isn't he, or where's he from?
Yes, he's British. Yeah.
What's his last take been on? Wow, he's got some interesting footage on there. Wow, he does.
Well, he's been tweeting pretty often since this started. In war, there's no authoritative source, but if you want to see the conflict, so this is the live map that we've been looking at. Putin attacks Ukraine. I'm out, but everyone I met could be dead, kidnapped, or injured within days, from the reservists to the ministers.
Oh my God!
This is a systematic attack on Ukrainian civil society. Well, we were just talking about civil society. They're on first-class tickets out of the country for sure.
Guys, you know, I read this report on AP the other day. I forgot to tell you guys about this. It was describing that Putin is about to attack Kiev with its 2 million innocent civilians. Why would you need to put the word innocent in there?
Yeah, but you know the problem I have is that, you know, I mean, we're doing our homework. I mean, we spend hundreds of hours just on studying Ukraine. I mean, everything, you know, and we are confronted with what I would call the average Joe. I mean, you know, what can you expect? You are living in Europe or in the US, and the only access you have, people are on survival mode. Do they have time to do what we are doing? They don't, you know, and people take shortcuts. You know, shortcuts, it's like people watching a movie and it's like, who's the bad guy and who's the good guy? It's exactly the same. And, you know, and people are becoming Pavlovian. You know, the Pavlovian dog, you know, the dog, he heard the bell and he was like, he had saliva. It's the same. People now here, we have conditioned people on hearing China bad, hearing Russia bad, you know, and just all those shortcuts. And people don't have the time like us to spend hundreds of hours and saying, well, you know what? No, it's not like this. You watch Ukraine now and you see an invasion. You're like, oh my God, it's an invasion. No, why don't you go back to 2014? Ukraine was occupied in 2014. There was a coup, you know. I mean, people don't have that time, and this is, you know, and we're spending so much time. And you guys have probably the same problems as I do. It's like, where do I start from? I mean, do I have time? Because people have been conditioned so much. That's what they've been hearing, and you come up with something which is completely different from what they believe. It's like, you must be nuts. You have a problem. And that's what I have. I don't even start, you know. I mean, where do I start from? I mean, am I going to redo your education? Do I have 3 hours to spend on that? No, I think we need you to, I mean, we need to address to at least people that have some level of awareness. But at least we need to do that, you know, because ignorance, well, the root of the problem is ignorance. You know, if people, they knew, you know, we wouldn't be where we are. You know, it's just that, and the West is cultivating this ignorance, you know, because people don't have time. People are busy doing selfies. They're busy on Instagram. They're busy watching Netflix. No, it's not that, you know. I mean, but this is how you control people. It's by distracting them. You put them in a survival mode. They have 3 jobs and they have a hard time to pay the bills. And then you give them junk food, Netflix, Instagram, and that's what you got. What are you expecting? You know, what are you expecting? Educate yourself. Educate yourself.
Angelo, but that, you know, that rule book is going to be thrown out here soon because, yeah, a good cooked meal, a warm belly, maybe a can of beer and EastEnders, and maybe to sit and you know, have an odd pub with the average Joe and you know, that kept people happy. That's what you always notice about the United Kingdom. They had the food was cheap. I always remember that. You go in the grocery store, food's cheap. You know, everybody can keep the heating on. Things are changing now, and the inflation comes in. And when that inflation comes, things get very out of order very fast. You know, my mother was saying to me, you know, hey, has your electricity bill gone up in China? And I was like, well, let me check. Okay, actually, maybe 50 cents this month. I spent more. And she says, well, mine's gone up about 35% in the last 4 months. You know, United Kingdom said that they're raising their electricity bills almost 50% in April because of, you know, economic times. And one last thing I'll tell you guys, if you go to get a quote, if you got a quote on your house last year anywhere in the Western countries, that's probably doubled to do the same job a year later. And that's why they're in such a panic now. You've seen report after report, you know, this inflation, it just keeps ticking up. Good luck buying a car, a new car in some of these Western countries. I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but some of these car lots are empty. Can't get the parts, can't get the suppliers. Had another YouTuber called Cyrus Jansen called me up the other night and said that, yeah, it was, one of his friends was, I think, renovating a house or something. And the developer said, well, bring your own refrigerator because we can't buy them. And you're seeing supply chains squeezed. And now they want to they want to shut off natural gas in what, February in Europe? Of course, there's pressure now, and it's cooking. That's for sure. It's definitely cooking over there. So you got everything going against you. Inflation. You've got a relatively very cold winter, and now you got pipeline issues. It's a perfect storm, and that's why I'm going to go out there and say that I don't think that this is over. I think 9 o'clock a.m. in the eastern coast of United States is when we're going to see the next move. That's my prediction.
Can I add one thing? Like the West, the hypocrisy of the West. We have redefined human rights. You know what the human rights that nowadays are in the West is the right to complain. But the real human rights, the definition in China or in other places is, the right to have food on the table, access to education, access to healthcare. We have distorted this notion of human right as being the right to complain. Well, the right to complain. Look at the US. You had the BLM movement, 6 months, destroying everything. Okay, well, freedom of speech is in the Constitution. You know what? If it's only the right to complain, but nothing happens, what is it for? The real human rights are tangible, you can touch. And we repeat many times with Brian is, well, can I eat democracy? Can I eat freedom? No, it's not that. And this is the illusion. People fighting, oh, well, I have my freedom to have a Nazi symbol or whatever. It's like, what is it bringing to your life, this freedom of speech, if it's not tangible? So, and people should not forget that it's not because you vote for someone that is the ultimate freedom. It's not. It's what does that system brings to you? Does it bring something tangible? Go back, tangible. Can I touch it?
My friend was telling me it's basically he's got freedom to be an a-hole. That's it.
Yeah. Well, it's the freedom to complain. It's the freedom to abuse one another. These are things that in a cohesive society, complaining all the time, but not having a plan or an alternative or any kind of solution, and abusing people, calling people names. They said, I could say this about my president. You can't say that about your leaders, your head of state in your country. It's abuse. What is abusing each other going to accomplish? This is why China is getting things done, and the West is burning entire countries to the ground to try to keep this fire that is empire going. And I think that's what I want to reiterate right now is that I've tried to warn people that this was coming, that the U.S. is going to do something extreme, not just in regards to Russia, but also in regards to China. We have to remember where we are in human history. We're at a point where a non-white nation is going to surpass all of Western civilization. China has a larger population than G7 combined. The West is not taking it very well. They're not coping with this very well. They are burning countries down. Look at Myanmar. This is a country at war with itself right now, fueled by the U.S., fueled by instability the U.S. had engineered and is perpetuating. They're going to do almost anything to stop China from rising, and destroying Russia is part of that plan. So people have to be ready for them to do extreme things that you would never imagine they would do. Some people say, I can't imagine the U.S. starting a naval engagement with China. Well, believe it. In order to disrupt trade going to and from China, they would do that if it meant buying them 10, 20, 30 more years as global hegemon. They will do it. Look at America's history. Look at the British Empire's history before that. What weren't they willing to do? Even when times were good, look at the horrible things that they would do to just get a little bit more or to expand things a little bit further. People have to be very careful about this juncture we're at in human history and realize what a complete paradigm shift we see taking place. Not just China, non-white nations surpassing the West, but also the concept of multipolarism taking root and subordinating this unipolar global order controlled by these entrenched, decrepit, just stagnant monopolies that have ruled the West for generations. So we got to be really careful. We cannot underestimate the West and what it's willing to do to try to wrest back some kind of control over Ukraine or trigger something big that cascades all the way back around to China. It's really dangerous.
Yeah, and you guys are mentioning about the media, many a times, and we have to be very careful what we're watching in the media. I mean, I live in China. I'm in one of China's largest cities in southwest China. It's a city of 32 million people, and I have to always knock out these doubters once in a while when they say stuff that is from another planet. They say, yeah, but you can't do this and you can't do that, and why aren't the people rising up there? And I had somebody tell me the other day, is the reason why people are taking vaccinations in China is because they're scared. I said, listen, there's trust here. And this might be very, very difficult for viewers to understand this, okay? And I'm going to try to get your head around this. But when you come to a country and you're a new arrival, you would immediately identify if there's something similar or not as good as in your country, or, something you might miss or something not. So I start off and I look at transportation is always a first way of looking at a country or a city. When you come off the airplane and you land in an airport, pretty much every city that I've been into China, the infrastructure right off the bat, you say, whoa, wait a minute, this is impressive. You walk out the door, nope, you're not being scammed or anything for taxis or anything. You're being greeted by a maglev, maybe bullet train, or another bullet train, or some rapid infrastructure system. And it's not costing you $50 to get to downtown. It might cost you 50 cents. So you sit in a city like this, 30-some million, okay? 14,000 bridges in the city I'm in China right now. 14,000. Mark it. Research it. I'm not lying. It has safe parks for families. The streets are safe. The malls are modern. Yes, people, the malls are modern. The people are kind. The people are enjoying times with their children. Families are at events watching people sing on stage. And if that's not enough for you, the cost of living is manageable on a salary that you're making here. You actually save money, okay? And I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying that whatever seems to be working here, and everybody seems, why don't the Chinese rise up? Why do they rise up? Because they're pretty happy.
Yeah.
I have 100 colleagues that no one really talks about politics. Now they'll say, but they're scared, they're afraid. Do the math. 90 million people in the Communist Party, right? Am I right? 90, 95 million? Is that in the ballpark? Is that close?
Somewhere. Yep.
No, yep.
So 90, 95 million. To be a Communist Party member, you have to be pretty smart. You don't just sign up to it like Amway. No, this is you're elected in there. You have certain responsibilities. It's for maybe the Western audience, they won't understand it. But where am I going with this? Where the 95 million people, some of them are married, some of them have a brother, some of them have a mother, father, whatever, and you see that 95 million quickly expand to almost most of the population. And to try to explain to me what China is, it's a country run like a company. And everybody's a shareholder. And that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. I mean, there was a Howard study. Howard is not. It's far from being pro-Chinese, but the Howard study say clearly there was they analyzed. They asked questions to people. Representative group of the population of China, and 95% are happy with the system. And I'm not. It's not about promoting that system, but it's a new system, and it fits. It's good for Chinese. I'm not saying that this could be exported to the West, but there are new elements, and we could learn from that. Maybe pick a few things. But there's one thing that comes out from this is meritocracy. Meritocracy is a system that you get the best that are at the top, that are leaders of your country. And you don't go there overnight. It's not because you go on a show and you promise and you're an actor like Zelensky. The guy is an actor. I say, I'm going to tell you, he's a clown. I'm going to tell you what you want to hear. And this is what people do. They are going to vote for whoever is going to tell them what they want to hear. In China, it's not like this. You know, there's a selection and election system. So you get into the system and you need to be selected. You know, if you are dumb, you're not going to be in the system. And then meritocracy, you get to the ladder of the power if you deliver. I'm good, I deliver, I go up. And again, that's the problem. You know, the thing is that it's a showmanship in the West. And again, you know, politicians, they listen to whoever finance them, not whoever vote for them. There's a huge difference. In the US, they're listening to whoever finance them, because whoever finance them are going to keep them in power, not to who elected them. You know, if they were listening to who elected them, then, you know, 75% of Americans want universal healthcare. If there was a real democracy, well, you know what? There would be a universal healthcare. There's not. Why? Because they're listening to the 1%.
Yeah, I just want to say I have been in Thailand and in Asia, living in Asia since 2004. I mean, pretty much my entire adult life I've been in Asia. I've watched Thailand change. I've watched it go from being, you know, the entire region was heavily influenced by the United States. It was the most powerful, richest country on earth. I've watched the pivot take place. I've watched China rise, and I've watched the rest of the region rise with it. And I've watched the way China influences the region in a very positive and constructive way, and the malicious and insidious way the West meddles, and it's influencing, but through meddling and exploiting, and also deliberately and artificially creating stagnation everywhere. And I've watched Asia overcome this, and it's because of the rise of China. And the rise of China means the rise of Asia. And people will say, I remember I had this German couple visit me in Thailand one time. It was right after the military coup in 2014 that ousted a U.S.-backed client regime, and they were saying, how you know, this is a military dictatorship. And I'm like, look around. I mean, where's the military? Do you see what are they doing to you that is stopping you from? What is it that you want to do that they're stopping you from doing? And they can't answer the question. And they're not bad people. They're victims of Western media and of Western propaganda. And this is the same thing. It applies to China. The perception many people in the West have toward China, they don't have to be like the West. The West is not superior. Westerners, white people, are not superior. They're not the master race. And you're allowed to think differently and do things differently and not be considered backwards for it. This mentality really has to stop. And people who have this mentality really need to look into the mirror and ask themselves some hard questions. So why are you still thinking like this? This is 18th century, 19th century racist imperialism. Yes.
Brian, I got a question for you, because I spent 7 years in Thailand as well. And, you know, these latest protests, what do you think? And then I'm going to follow up behind after you answer it and just give you a little bit of a story. But this last protest in Thailand, who do you think was behind that?
Oh, it's obviously the United States. The core organizations behind it are funded by the U.S. government through the National Endowment for Democracy. They're carrying signs that say anti-Sinovax. The political party that's kind of hiding behind them is this Future Forward. Now it's called Move Forward. And it's run by this billionaire, Thanathorn Juangruangruangit. And he traveled to the U.S. As part of his campaign for political office in Thailand. That's a little weird. And one of his big things was visiting the Hyperloop. I think it was in Arizona. And then he came back and he said, we should cancel the Chinese-Thai high-speed railway, which was already under construction at the time, and we should replace it with Hyperloop. So pretty obvious who's behind this and what it's like I said, it's so childish. Once you understand who's funding it and what the agenda is, it's almost childish. But it's sucked in a lot of people.
You know, now that's interesting, and that's where I'm going to carry on with this point. Is before I left Thailand to come to China, I've been here a while now. Wow. Okay. I sat down. I was at a house party, and you know, this guy come up to me and he says, you know, what do you think of Thailand? I said, it's been good to me. I've seen the healthcare improve dramatically. Everything's fine. And he says, yeah, I just got back from protest. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Tell me let me ask you some questions, young man. He was a young guy, law student, just finished law school. I said, can you go out at night? He says, yeah. I said, can you go have a drink in a bar? Yeah. Can you travel? Can you pick up can you pick up your passport and travel to another country? If there wasn't, an ongoing pandemic. He says, yeah. I said, can you study any religion that you want? Well, yes, of course we can. Got a driver's license? Yeah. Girlfriend's got a driver's license? Yeah. Can you buy a home? Yeah. Can you go to the bank, get your money? Yeah. Can you yell and tell somebody to F off? Yeah. Can you stand up in the middle of outside of a BTS SkyTrain station and, tell down with the country? Yeah, I can do all that. I can do all that. I said, what are you protesting for? He says, for freedom.
Yeah.
I said, you got it. What are you missing? He couldn't come up with a word.
Nobody
ever stopped.
Yeah.
Nobody ever stopped this 27-year-old kid. I call him a kid because he was a recent university student, to explain it to him that way. What do you think is out there? Do you think what is out there is, I could understand if it was raining cash and they told you the land with, the yellow brick road, but I can rent that movie for you. I can, play that movie for you if you want to believe in fantasies. But what you have is as good as it's going to. I was speechless because this guy's out there with all the other guys. And it was funny because, I was researching, one of the main characters in Hong Kong was the Joshua Wong guy, right? Well, he was arrested immediately when he came to Thailand.
Yep.
And basically sent him back. Is that a bad thing for national security for the country? But no, Apple News made a big story about it. The I think recently defunct Apple News. I don't even think they're in business anymore. But and if you watched how the Hong Kong situation, I flew to Hong Kong in the middle of the riots, and if you tried to set up for a press pass at the time, there was a massive Reddit post, and the Reddit post forwarded you to Apple Media to get your accredited media pass and your accredited really high-res, what do they call it, vest. Well, I just went out and bought one and went there. I went out and printed my own press cap and went in there and said, wait a minute, this is absolutely insane. And I don't get what's going on here. And once again, that it comes down to what the Western media shows, the other media start showing, and then the people start believing. And that's why, again, today on this program, be very, very careful over the next 24 hours or 48 hours what you're going to see. Because I know immediately this morning when my mother wakes up, she's going to call me and said, she's smarter now, though, guys. She's a lot smarter. But she's going to go, son, can you explain before I make a comment what just happened? And she will give me that time instead of 2 or 3 years ago saying, how dare he invade? So the audience is getting smarter. The viewers are getting smarter. And we're finally getting there. But be very, as Angelo was saying, be very careful here over the next few hours or 24 hours or 48 hours. There's a lot of fake news rolling around.
Yeah. So we're over 3 hours. I think we're gonna wrap it up. Maybe just some closing thoughts from everyone. If you're just for some reason you're just joining us, we're talking about Ukraine, Russian military operations taking place in Ukraine after literally just decades of U.S. NATO encroachment, encirclement, and containment all along Russia's boundaries. And if you remember, there was the war in Chechnya, and this was all sponsored by the U.S., just like they've been doing in Syria. And so along and even within Russia's borders, this is what the U.S. has done for decades, and Russia is drawing a red line, and no one's crossing it. And well, we'll have to see, like you said, Alex, what they're going to do in response. And my final thoughts are just be extremely careful about this. Watch it very carefully, because however this plays out, it's going to directly shape U.S. policy toward China regarding Taiwan, and how all of that is going to unfold. Like I said, there's a window of opportunity that is quickly closing for the United States to reassert its hegemony. Once it closes, once China surpasses the US and the rest of the West, it will be irreversible. They know it, and there's almost nothing that they wouldn't do to try to stop this from happening, at least from my point of view. Angelo, go ahead.
Well, same as you. I just want to add, there are some indicators very interesting. The gold has gained 4%. It's unique. And I know, Alex, you've been investing into gold. I mean, this is an advanced indicator. It's about the de-dollarization. The world is changing, and with the collapse of the U.S. hegemony, there's going to be a collapse of the dollar. And I think people are going to hedge their bets on the short and long term over gold, because there's going to be a new Bretton Woods. So on the last thoughts, I would say, just repeating what we keep on repeating when we talk to each other, Brian, is people need to educate themselves. It's not white and black. People need to really study the root of the problems. If you take a snapshot of Ukraine, you'll be like, oh no, they're invading Ukraine. No, it's not like that. Take time and study what happened. You need to go back to 2004, Orange Color Revolution, 2014, the neo-Nazi took power. It's really study the issue. And again, I want to say, we are not pro-China, pro-Russia. We love our countries. Actually, I want to add something. It is because we love our countries that we don't want our countries to collapse and to be drawn into a war that ultimately we are all going to pay for that war. It's because we love our countries, not because we are pro-China and pro-Russia. But we are not going to fight the war of an elite of 1% that are not going to send their kids to the front. And so I would say, people, educate yourself, learn, and once you learn, you can take side. But if you take side and you haven't studied the issue, then you're just a useful idiot. Sorry.
Absolutely. Alex, first of all, thank you for joining us. Any last thoughts on this?
Yeah, usually when these things get out of control, I'll say, and the placards come out to the main square in Kiev, that's usually where they form. Just keep in mind, and I want to say this with great detail on TV, if you start to see some beautiful protesting, let's call them placards that you hold up, remember that somebody is probably funding the printing machine. This isn't an average guy that's out there with a Jiffy marker saying, come save us. Some of these things are designed to go throughout our television screens around the world and send messages. As Brian was saying, Angelo was saying as well, the 2004, the 2014, you keep thousands of people in the city center and somebody's not, who's paying for all that food, and who's paying for all those tents, and who's paying for all that, and those beautiful placards and the fantastic colors of what they want the future elected party to be, possibly even looks like their slogan with just a little bit different logo. That's what you got to be very careful about. And I thank you guys for bringing Patrick on. It's now that he's come on here and he's seen that you guys are all about getting the truth out there. At any time, I will try to, if you guys are live, to get him on here. But yeah, my prayers are with that guy, because the next 48 hours, his life could be completely turned upside down. Thank you again, Brian. And thank you.
Yes, sure. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So we're going to keep an eye on this. In the video description below, I'll add Alex's information as well, so you can follow all three of us. Follow us on social media. We will, be following this, commenting on it, analyzing it, and if anything else major happens, maybe we'll do another live episode. So just stay tuned. For everyone that joined us during the live broadcast, thank you so much. And if you're watching this recorded, Please like and share. Think about subscribing. We're doing this on our own. We don't have some big multi-billion-dollar millionaire sponsor. This is all us just doing this, and it's not fun. It's depressing. It's stressful. I don't want to do it. I'm doing it because other people will not do it, and I understand why they don't want to do it. Trust me. So until next time, and again, thank you, Angelo. Thank you, Alex. Until next time, bye for now.